Chapter 121. Heavens, heavens, heavens. As expected of Boss Nguyen's husband. What a timely rain. Xiao Ba stood behind Jin Wan, filled with excitement. $200 million. Are you sure you're not joking? CEO Jin's expression was confused. Her eyes were filled with disdain. Could it be that Miss G was afraid of losing face and hired 2 extras to support you? This time, Xiao Ba glared at CEO Jin confidently. Some people shouldn't look down on others, all right? It seems like CEO Jin is indeed not a Haicheng local. You don't even know that our CEO G is the wife of the MO Corporation CEO. CEO Jin immediately stared at Jin Wan in astonishment before shifting her gaze to Xiao Ba. She then stared at the 2 representatives from the CE investment agency who clearly did not look like fake actors. Although CEO Jin's family's company was in Haicheng, she was often abroad. Each time she returned, she would only stay for a few days before leaving. The company was managed by her husband. She only knew of Haicheng's 4 prominent families and that this Jin Wan was the Ji family's daughter. Right now, the Ji family was no longer as stable as they were a few years ago in the upper class. A mere identity as the Ji family's daughter did not have much of an impact. But MO Corporation, of course she had heard of it. CEO Jin paused for a moment before shifting her gaze to the 2 CE investment agency investors. Are you for real? The 2 did not even glance at her. They continued to politely face Jin Wan. CEO G, please forgive us for coming uninvited. The investment contract has already been drafted before we came. Please take a look. They handed the contract over. Jin Wan hesitated for a moment before accepting it. She was actually quite shocked. This CE investment agency was the largest investment company in Haicheng in the past 10 years. It had many well-known cooperation cases with many of the world's top 100 companies. Right now, CE Investment Agency was already under the MO Corporation's name. Jin Wan's original plan was to sell the 2 or 3 properties and idle cars under her name for tens of millions of yuan so that she could continue to build those properties. She still had the inheritance her mother left her before she passed away. Although it was not much, it was enough for her to temporarily solve the current situation. After all, the money could be earned back in the future, so she had been steady and orderly. She only dealt with the personnel changes in the studio and was not very anxious about the money. She didn't expect that Imo Jingshan had already known her financial situation like the back of his hand. Not only did he send the most authoritative investment agency to sign a contract with her, but the contract even clearly indicated the budget of the land and real estate projects under her studio's name, which not only saved her a lot of trouble, but also directly pointed out a clear path for her. Is this arranged by your CEO MO? Jin Wan looked up after reading it. The tall man, who was one of the representatives, nodded and smiled at her modestly. We know CEO G's concerns. In fact, you can think of it this way. What our investment organization values is the market prospects and the profits we can reap in the future. Even if CEO G has no relationship with MO Corporation, we will screen and plan the nearby real estate companies and find the most suitable company to invest a sum of money in. MO Jingshan really understood her well. These 2 people's words were really watertight and logical. They managed to expose MO Jingshan's true relationship with her, and at the same time, they managed to save her face. I'll have to trouble the 2 of you to wait in the VIP lounge. Jin Wan was silent for a moment before nodding at them. She then turned to look at CEO Jin, who was still standing by the door. CEO Jin, is there anything else? From afar, CEO Jin had seen the logo on the contract in Jin Wan's hands. It was indeed the anti-counterfeiting logo of the CE Investment Agency. The people from CE personally came to sign the contract and directly showed them the anti-counterfeiting logo. From this, it could be seen how much importance they placed on this studio. In an instant, CEO Jean felt that the card in her hand that she had just asked for back was burning hot. She changed her mocking expression and said with an awkward smile, "Miss G, I haven't looked through the PowerPoint you showed me earlier. Actually, it's not that we can't continue working together, but I'm not too confident in the domestic real estate market. Why don't we find some time to specifically talk about this?" Jean Wan glanced at her. "Earlier, I've already asked CEO Jean to reconsider. I've asked you again and again if you're sure you want to terminate the contract." CEO Jean felt as though her face had been slapped loudly. However, if Jean Wan truly had the backing of the MO Corporation, then this so-called studio would definitely not close down. Furthermore, the MO Corporation also had the illustrious Hai Ching MO family behind it. That was the MO family. Earlier, I was indeed in the wrong. My emotions were a little extreme, and I said a few angry words in a moment of hot-headedness. Actually, I've thought about it carefully. The real estate market is indeed what everyone needs the most. Although we've just signed the contract, we're terminating the previous investment contract with CEO Han. I think it's a good time to re-sign the contract with the new MO Wan studio. Jean Wan smiled lightly at her, but her voice was directed at Xiao Ba, who had a disgusted expression. "Xiao Ba, send the guest out." When Xiao Ba heard this, she instantly felt extremely satisfied. She nodded her head forcefully. "All right." As she spoke, she walked forward and smiled at CEO Jean, who was gradually losing her composure. She extended her hand toward the slightly opened office door and gestured for her to enter. "CEO Jean, take care." CEO Jean also wanted her face. However, the moment she thought that she might have offended Jean Wan, as well as the MO family or MO Corporation, her heart trembled. Although she came here today to retrieve the 30 million yuan, she had unknowingly brought trouble to her own company. She then saw that Jean Wan clearly did not intend to continue talking to her. Her attitude remained calm and indifferent, causing her to be unable to understand what was going on. She instantly felt anxious in her heart. "Miss G, regarding the cooperation, we can really discuss it again. If you have any dissatisfaction toward me, I can get my husband to personally re-sign the contract with you." CEO Jean decided to lower her stance and look toward Jean Wan with a face full of smiles. Jean Wan chuckled lightly. Her tone was unhurried and meaningful. "Right now, I'm afraid your husband won't have the time to care about such matters." CEO Jin's expression was surprised. It was clear that she did not understand the hidden meaning behind her words. However, the hint of mockery and meaning still caused CEO Jean to instinctively furrow her brows. Not wanting to waste any more time, Jean Wan gave Xiao Ba another look. Xiao Ba directly went to open the office door. She then turned to look at the conflicted CEO Jean. "CEO Jean, please." The intention to chase her away was extremely obvious. No matter how thick-skinned she was, she could tell that right now, Jean Wan was not going to give her any chance to continue talking about the cooperation. Chapter 122. Serves her right. Who asked her to look down on us? No wonder she dared to bring her lawyer over to forcefully terminate the contract. It turns out that she didn't even investigate our studio's background and dared to bully us. Xiao Ba spat at the door. She turned back to see Jean Wan standing there with a pensive expression. "Boss Wan, are we really going to receive a $200 million investment?" Xiao Ba's eyes were filled with anticipation. She jogged back as though she wanted to hug her thigh, moving closer to Jean Wan's side. Jean Wan was silent for a moment before saying, "Go call the police and have them bring Supervisor Su away." She's suspected of embezzlement and other business crimes. We need to investigate them carefully. Hand her over to the police station first. Xiao Ba was shocked. She then asked in a voice that only Jean Wan could hear, "A few days ago, you asked me to investigate Supervisor Su's personal situation. Did you already suspect her?" Jean Wan glanced at her indifferently. "With your reaction speed, you probably won't even understand what's going on when the company is sold. Why are you trying to act smart with me now? I'm asking you to call the police, so hurry up and do it." "Oh." Xiao Ba looked at her with a wronged expression. Her hands moved quickly as she picked up her phone and called the nearby police station. 2 hours later. Because she had signed a contract worth $200 million with CE International Investment Agency, this small studio under Jean Wan's name, which was originally unknown, had become the small studio with the highest amount of funding in Haicheng. In this hour, the phone on Jean Wan's desk was about to explode from the calls. Most of them were from previous investors who suddenly called to show concern about the studio situation. They even said they wanted to arrange a time to meet with Jean Wan to discuss the investment. Some even expressed their sincerity through the phone, saying that they had always felt that Han Tianyuan was unreliable. After Jean Wan took over, they had always looked forward to working with Jean Wan, and so on. After receiving too many calls, Jean Wan finally had a moment of peace. She was about to pour herself a glass of water when all of a sudden, the phone in her pocket vibrated. She picked it up and saw that it was Mo Jingshan. Earlier, Jean Wan was afraid that he was busy and did not look for him. Now, he actually took the initiative to call her. She returned to her desk and sat down. She picked up the phone and said, "Why didn't you tell me in advance that you suddenly sent 2 people from CE Investment to sign a contract with me? You threw money at me without saying a word. You scared me to death, okay? Why are you so timid? It's just an investment cooperation." The man's voice came from the other end of the phone. His voice was deep and sexy. Jean Wan couldn't help complaining to him about the bunch of phone calls she had just received, as well as the disgusting faces of those people. Then she said, "The key is that those who originally intended to withdraw their investment are now fighting to continue to invest. I'm just a studio. If this continues, the amount of financing will be enough for me to set up a shareholding company." Mo Jingshan smiled mildly. "Mrs. Mo is ambitious and has a bright future. I have to help you. Boss Missouri, this isn't just a helping hand." Since the contract had been signed, Jean Wan was not in the mood to be delicate. She said bluntly, I suddenly feel a little pressured." "Pressured is a good thing. This proves that Mrs. Mo hasn't lost her direction," Mo Jingshan said calmly. Mo Jingshan spoke calmly, "You know very well that I sent CE's people over and did not go personally. There was also a contract signed in the middle. You should know that this investment wasn't placed in your hands for nothing." "Of course I know." Jean Wan held her chin, leaning against the table. She pressed the phone to her ear, her voice clear and gentle. "So, although it seems like I've received such a high investment, in reality, I'm actually in debt of $200 million. Furthermore, the contract that CE people gave me also included a guarantee. Within 5 years, my profits will be doubled. Otherwise, I can withdraw my investment at any time." Mo Jingshan calmly said, "It's good that you know." Jean Wan held her forehead. The people in the studio were currently celebrating the generous investment they had just received. Only she was clear that she had a huge debt on her, and the creditor was her husband. The methods that Mo Jingshan had used today without batting an eyelid, every step that he had taken was impossible for her to reject. Business was official, and the contract was signed by CE's people. None of this was child's play. Thus, Mo Jingshan still respected her initial wishes and did not interfere. This investment, he really did not give it for nothing. Hearing the little woman lying on the table and sighing, Mo Jingshan softly chuckled. Previously, weren't you very confident in the future property industry in the country? I still have confidence. But suddenly, the pressure is huge. This isn't a small case like tens of millions. It's only doubled in 5 years. Why? You don't dare to accept it. I've already signed it. Of course I dare, Mo Jingshan chuckled lightly. All right, go home early. I'll pick you up at the U Garden before 6. After work, Jean Wan drove back to the U Garden as promised. After alighting from the car, she was still thinking about the studio. She walked into the U Garden, opened the door to the villa, and closed the door without turning back. She threw her bag on the table, changed her shoes, and entered the living room on the first floor. She took off her coat. The U Garden was huge. Not mentioning the floors above, just the living room on the first floor was over 200 square meters. Including the kitchen, dining room, and guest rooms, the total area was over 400 square meters. And at this moment, this place, to Jean Wan, was suddenly too spacious and quiet. At this time, the usually warm and considerate Auntie Chen actually did not come out to welcome her. The servants who usually walked around on the first floor were also not around. Perhaps using the word spacious was not appropriate. But it was unusually quiet. Jean Wan casually raised her eyes, scanning the living room in front of her. She felt that something was wrong. Earlier, when she entered the door, she had already sensed that something was amiss. Earlier on, when she drove back, not far from the U Garden, there seemed to be a black Jeep parked there. The model of the car had never appeared in this area before, and the license plate was something she had never seen before. It was just that she did not pay too much attention to it. Now that she thought of it, she abruptly raised her eyes to look at her surroundings. She instinctively took a step back, until she vaguely sensed danger approaching. She bent down to pick up her bag from the ground. Without even changing her shoes, she decisively turned to run out. And at this moment, 2 unfamiliar men hiding in the corner of the first floor suddenly rushed out at a rapid speed. They were like ferocious beasts waiting for an opportunity to hunt in the bushes. When the time was ripe, they began to bare their fangs. Just as Jean Wan was about to open the door and shout for help, they dragged her back in. Chapter 123. Help, Yu. The 2 men forcibly pressed Jean Wan down. One skillfully restrained her arms behind her back, while the other quickly covered her mouth with a wet cloth. They were well-trained and professional, making it impossible for her to dodge. Although Jean Wan was prepared, she was still restrained in less than a second. Her mouth was covered harshly, and she could not even utter a complete sentence. Yu. Let, Yu. In her struggle, she tried to remember the appearance of the 2 men, but before she could see them clearly, her head was pressed down harshly. Their rough fingers pressed down on an extremely vulnerable spot on the back of her neck, causing blood to rush to her brain and her vision to blur. It was difficult to even focus her eyes. Miss G, we're only following orders. Please cooperate. Otherwise, we can't guarantee that we won't hurt you. The man who held her down said in a rough and ruthless voice. Jean Wan stiffened and did not resist desperately. The 2 men quickly brought her out. Her mouth was covered with force, so she could not cry out. Soon, she was pushed into the back seat of the black Jeep. Only after the door was closed did Jean Wan breathe freely. She turned to see that the back seat and the front seat were completely separated. There was a solid metal plate in the middle, and she could not see what was happening in front. The rear doors and windows were also sealed shut, and the only door that could be opened was locked from the outside in an instant. Jean Wan raised her hand and twisted the door several times in vain. No matter how she hit or kicked, it would not open. The car window was reinforced with a black film. The people outside could not see inside, and the people inside could not see outside. It was a vast expanse of darkness. "Who on earth are you? Let me out of the car." Jean Wan turned around and slapped the metal plate in front of her. She did not know if the people in front heard her, but no matter how she yelled or slapped, she could not hear any sound. She could only feel that the car had started the engine and was driving away from the Yew Garden at an extremely fast speed. Who sent these people to kidnap her? The security in the Yew Garden was so perfect. Why were the people at home suddenly not here? Would Auntie Chen and the others be all right? Even though she knew it was futile, Jean Wan still slapped the door hard for a long time. There was no sound at all in front. It was clear that the metal plate was soundproof. Jean Wan leaned against the metal plate weakly. Boundless darkness and unknown fear surrounded her. Her hands and feet gradually turned cold. She stared at a spot in the darkness and slowly narrowed her eyes. To be able to sneak into the Yew Garden without a trace and without the slightest feeling of chaos in the house, it was most likely the G family or the Mo family. After all, only these two families would Auntie Chen not suspect them and would let them in. Mo Jingshan told her not to wander around these days and to go home early was more or less reminded her that she would be in danger. Recalling the scene when she was locked in the bathroom that day, Jean Wan could roughly sense that Mo Jingshan's father, Mo Xiaozi, was a person who would not rest until he achieved his goals. As long as he wanted to do something, even if it meant offending Mo Jingshan, even if his methods were ruthless and unacceptable, he would not hesitate to do it. Just now, when the two men restrained her, they had warned her, but apart from taking her away, they did not seem to have any intention of harming her. Jean Wan was most likely Mo Xiaozi. Jean Wan's originally panicked heart gradually calmed down. No matter what Mo Xiaozi was planning to do, it would definitely not endanger her life. The Mo family and the Ji family were both prominent families in Haiqing. With Mo Jingshan in the mix, Mo Xiaozi would not dare to kill anyone. As the car drove, the surroundings were dark. It was impossible to tell how much time had passed. Every minute and second felt like an entire year. Jean Wan closed her eyes in dizziness because of the increasingly scarce air behind the car. Regardless of Mo Xiaozi's motive, she had to conserve her energy first before she could face him with a clear mind. After an unknown amount of time, she finally heard the car door open. Jean Wan opened her eyes. She squinted because of the strong light outside the car, but before she could clearly see the appearance of the two, she was abruptly dragged out by them. They still pressed her down and covered her mouth. However, this time, Jean Wan's resistance was much weaker. She only made two woo-woo sounds before she was brought in. The two nimbly pushed her into a room. Jean Wan stumbled and fell to the floor inside. Her arms hurt when they hit the ground. She forced herself to sit up and looked up at the door that was quickly closed. "Miss G, please stay here for a night. Tomorrow morning, we'll send you back." The voices of the two came from outside the door, followed by the sound of their footsteps leaving. Jean Wan rushed to the door, but it was already locked from the inside. The door in front of her was made of high-grade wood. It was very sturdy. If it was locked from the inside, it would be impossible to break it open without hard tools. Jean Wan's hand paused on the door. She abruptly turned back to look at the dark room. Although she could not see clearly, she felt that the floor she fell on was of good quality. This place did not seem like a place that kidnappers would use because it was very high grade. She tentatively raised her hand and felt around the wall by the door. When she found the light switch, she pressed it with a paw sound. The light in the room suddenly turned on. Although it was not a glaring light, it was a soft light that allowed one to see everything clearly. What entered her eyes was a very luxurious guest room. It had all the daily necessities, including a bathroom. There was a large bed in the center of the room. Although it looked elegant and exquisite, from the furnishings, it was indeed a guest room. Directly opposite, there was a window behind the curtains. Jean-Wan quickly walked over and pulled open the curtains. The sky outside was already dark. She estimated that it was at least 7 or 8 in the evening. The window was not a floor-to-ceiling window, but an ordinary square window. This was the 3rd floor of an unknown villa. It was not particularly tall, but the window was explosion-proof and could not be broken. The only small window that could be opened was also locked. She had thought that the mastermind behind the kidnappers had made a mistake and thought that they could escape through the window. The glimmer of hope that had just been ignited was once again shattered. Jean-Wan stood by the window and looked out. She saw the large swimming pool behind the villa and the surrounding flower beds full of life. Was there someone living here now? This window faced the back of the villa. There was no road behind, nor were there any people or cars passing by. Even if the lights were on in the room, no one would be able to see her if she stood by the window and made a gesture of knocking on the window for help. There was no way to escape. Jean-Wan paced back and forth in the room. Chapter 124. Jean-Wan hugged her legs as she sat by the window, staring at the sky outside. Being locked up here, time seemed to have stopped. It was only when she vaguely heard the sound of a car approaching that she abruptly stood up. She turned and rushed to the door, pressing her ear against it. This was the 3rd floor. She could not hear the movements on the 1st floor clearly, but she did hear a loud knock on the door. Then, there were footsteps approaching from the 1st floor. Jean-Wan raised her hand and tried to knock on the door twice, wanting to remind the person rushing over that she was locked up here. You still have the strength to knock on the door. Did you think the person who came was Jingshin? All of a sudden, a voice that was slightly unfamiliar to Jean-Wan came from outside. That voice carried the experience and low voice of a middle-aged man. His tone was cold and even a little disdainful. Jean-Wan's hand immediately froze on the door. Miss Ji, I'm Mo Jingshin's father. Today, I invited you here to stay for a night. I have no intention of harming you. After tomorrow, you'll be free. In Mo Xiao's words, the so-called freedom, Jean-Wan could clearly hear another layer of meaning. She was silent for a moment before raising her voice to say, since you're Jingshin's father, I should call you Dad in name. We're a family. Why did you lock me up, this Dad? I can't accept it. Mo Xiao coldly said, Jingshin has more important things to do tonight. He doesn't have time to deal with your problem. You can stay here in peace. Where is Mo Jingshin right now? Jean-Wan instinctively had a bad premonition. From today onwards, his whereabouts have nothing to do with you. You can only stay here today. Don't run out and ruin his plans. After coldly saying this, Mo Xiao directly left the door. He did not plan on saying another word to her. At the same time, there was the sound of a car approaching. Jean-Wan suppressed the layers of uneasiness in her heart and leaned against the door to listen carefully. Not long after, she heard what sounded like the sound of a walking stick hitting the ground. Following that, Elder Mo's angry roar rang from the staircase. You locked that G-brat here, didn't you? Let her out right now. It was Grandfather Mo. Jean-Wan frantically knocked on the door. Grandfather. I'm here. Grandpa, there was a short silence outside. She was on this floor, so Grandfather Mo might not be able to hear her. Outside, Elder Mo raised his voice and scolded, Xiao Zhe. No matter how much power you have in America, don't forget that Hai Qing still has me and Jingshin. If I want you to leave Shine, all I need to do is say the word. You don't even listen to your own father now, do you? Elder Mo angrily roared. He had rushed here in a hurry, and his words were rough. Jinwan and Jingshin's relationship is very good. If you dare to force this loving couple to live the rest of their lives in torment, don't even think about entering the Mo family's doors in this lifetime. I don't recognize you as my cruel and merciless son. Father, please calm down. Mo Xiaozhe had already descended. His tone was neither fast nor slow. It's already this late. The setup that should be set has already been set. The people who should be involved have already entered. Even if you fly over now, it'll be useless. Jingshin can't stay in the country forever. Many years ago, he had his own achievements in America. In the future, when he inherits Shine, he will stay in America for a long time. In this huge Hai Qing, a mere daughter of the Ji family is completely unsuitable for him. Whether he's suitable or not is Jingshin's own choice. Did you really think that back then, Jingshin and Jinwan's marriage was completely arranged by me? If Jingshin hadn't agreed to it himself, even if I held a knife to his neck, he wouldn't have married her. Elder Mo said harshly. So what? Back then, when Jingshin left America, I already warned him. If he wasn't so hard to control, I wouldn't have used such a method. He belongs to Shine. He can't be limited to this Hai Qing forever. If he wants to leave, he has to break away from Jinwan, an unimportant shackle. Mo Xiaozhe's reply was cold and arrogant, leaving no room for negotiation. T. You kidnapped Jinwan, drugged your own son, and locked him in a hotel room within Shuyan. Did you learn such despicable methods from those Americans? Hearing these words, Jinwan, who had been quietly standing by the door, felt as though she had fallen into an icy lake. Her blood from head to toe lost all warmth. Since I've sent Shu Yan to Hai Qing, I don't plan on sending her back to the Yin family in America. She must marry Jingshin. Mo Xiaozhe's tone was cold and arrogant. You're already old. There's no need to worry about the marriage of the younger generation. As long as we successfully get through tonight, perhaps Shu Yan's stomach will have the great-grandson you've longed for day and night. Pa! Are you trying to force Jingshin to his death, or are you trying to force me to my death? Mo Xiaozhe was cold and indifferent. Father, you came here. Even if you can bring Jinwan away, what can you do? Before I came back, Jingshin and Shu Yan had already been together in the room for more than half an hour. Right now, even more time has passed. That kind of drug, not to mention Jingshin's hot-blooded age, even someone like you in your 70s or 80s would not be able to withstand it. You bastard. Elder Mo abruptly raised his walking stick and viciously struck Mo Xiaozhe. How could I have a son like you? Immediately call the people over there to release Jingshin and Shu Yan. I can't watch as Jingshin is destroyed by you. It's too late. The drug takes effect quickly. No man can withstand it. If you open the door now, you'll undoubtedly be interrupting Jingshin's good time. You unfilial son. I really regret not strangling you to death in your swaddling clothes 50 years ago. Mo Xiaozhe sneered disapprovingly. If I die, where will you find such a good grandson in the future? Elder Mo angrily swatted him away with his walking stick and rushed upstairs. Where did you lock Jinwan up? Mo Xiaozhe saw that the elder had already gone up to the third floor. It was clear that he had heard Jinwan's incessant knocking on the door. His eyes were cold and displeased. However, because the elder had already found his way over, he coldly followed up. Jinwan was behind the door. Her lips had already been bitten until they bled. She forcefully knocked on the door. "Grandfather, I'm here." The sound of the walking stick and hurried footsteps approached at the same time. Elder Mo stepped forward and used his walking stick to hit the door harshly. He flew into a rage and turned back to glare at Mo Xiaoze. "If you don't release Jin Wan today, if you dare to let anything happen to either Jing Shin or Jin Wan, this old man will directly die in front of you." "Father." Mo Xiaoze's expression was cold. Chapter 125. "If this old man can't save my grandson and granddaughter-in-law today, I'll drag you, my own son, down with me." Elder Mo's anger shook the heavens as he turned and charged toward the staircase. Mo Xiaoze saw that he was serious and immediately furrowed his brows. "Jin Wan can be released, but even if you bring her to look for Jing Shin now, the result will be the same. Why do you have to do this? *CK your mother's bullshit. Jing Shin definitely won't touch the in-family's girl." Elder Mo harshly said. "Are you going to release her or not? Do you want me to place righteousness before family and beat you, this unfilial son, to death? Will you only let this matter rest after the Mo family is destroyed?" Mo Xiaoze was silent for a moment before abruptly shifting his gaze toward the bodyguard at the staircase. The bodyguard nodded and took the key to open the door to Jin Wan's room. The crisp sound of the door being unlocked rang. In the next moment, Jin Wan forcefully twisted the door open and rushed out. She immediately saw Mo Xiaoze standing in the corridor with an ugly expression. Her entire face was slightly pale as she turned to look at Elder Mo. "G brat. Are you hurt anywhere? Quickly tell grandfather." Elder Mo walked over shakily with the support of his walking stick. His eyes were filled with heartache. Jin Wan's lips were stained with blood from her own biting. She silently stared at the elder for a long time. After confirming that the elder's expression of anger and heartache was real and that he was not joking, she suppressed the surging emotions in her heart and tried to ask calmly, "Grandfather, what you said earlier, is it true?" Knowing that she had heard it, Elder Mo closed his eyes. It was clear that he did not want her to feel too uncomfortable. He softly comforted her. "Don't worry. I believe in Jing Shin. He will definitely be able to endure it." Mo Xiaoze's gaze was dark and cold. "Father, you've already seen her. Can you be at ease now?" Elder Mo turned back to scold him. Mo Xiaoze had already called for the bodyguard. "Send the elder back to the Mo residence." "You're only letting me go back." "No, Jin Wan has to leave with me." Elder Mo held onto his walking stick with one hand and quickly reached out with the other. He grabbed Jin Wan's wrist and pulled her behind him. His aged and slightly hunched body shielded Jin Wan behind him. Jin Wan looked at the elder in front of her but could not say a word. Her eyes were cold as she stared at the expressionless Mo Xiaoze. Mo Xiaoze ignored Jin Wan's gaze and said coldly, "I let you see her to prove that she is indeed unharmed here, but before tomorrow morning, she can't leave this place. She must stay under my watch. I can't give her a chance to ruin Jing Shen and Shu Yan's good time." Jin Wan's breathing was already trembling. She abruptly opened her mouth. "You're using such a method to force him. Have you considered the consequences you'll face tomorrow?" Mo Xiaoze laughed coldly. "Consequences? Of course, the result will be you signing the divorce papers. Do you think that after tonight, Jing Shen will still be yours?" In both her lives, Jin Wan had never been so angered that her entire body was trembling. If the person in front of her was not Mo Jingshen's father, she would definitely take a knife and chop him. Sensing her agitated emotions, Elder Mo pressed down on her hand. "G brat, go back with grandfather first. She can't leave." Mo Xiaoze's eyes were filled with displeasure. "She must leave with me. Elder Mo grabbed onto Jin Wan's wrist, unwilling to leave her here. She's Jing Shen's person. Even if Jing Shen isn't here, on account that Jin Wan calls me grandfather, I'll bring her safely back to the Mo family. Xu Yan can also call you grandfather. Mo Xiao's expression was cold. After tonight, Jing Shen will know that the most suitable person for him is still in Xu Yan. Elder Mo's expression was cold. He still held on to Jin Wan's wrist tightly, blocking her behind him. Every time the two bodyguards tried to approach, the elder would raise his walking stick and force them away. Elder Mo angrily shouted, "Who dares to touch my granddaughter-in-law? Step over this old man's body first." Father. Mo Xiao's expression was dark. His voice was filled with warning and dissatisfaction. At your age, you shouldn't meddle in the matters of the younger generation. Elder Mo refused to move aside. Even though he was old, his gaze was still bright. It was not much different from his 50-year-old son. Mo Xiaozi watched this scene. After a moment, he furrowed his brows and impatiently waved his hand. All right. Let them go. Send the elder back to the Mo residence. Elder Mo's expression did not soften. He directly brought Jin Wan, whose face was pale from anger, down the stairs. It's fine to bring Jin Wan back to the Mo residence. Tomorrow morning, I'll have Jing Shen and Xu Yan go back to see you and sign the divorce papers with her. Mo Xiaozi stood at the foot of the stairs, speaking heavily. Elder Mo coldly harumphed and did not pay him any heed. Finally, Jin Wan was brought into the car. Elder Mo sat in the front, his expression heavy as he called for the chauffeur to drive. He then turned back to comfort her. Child, don't worry. I believe in Jing Shen. With his willpower, he will definitely be able to overcome everything that happened tonight. He loves you and will protect your marriage. Other than you, he won't touch any other woman. Trust grandfather. Jin Wan had suppressed her emotions for a long time. She tried her best to maintain her composure in front of the elder so that he would not worry too much. She softly asked, "So, is he really locked up within Xu Yan?" Elder Mo sighed softly. "I know very well what kind of person Jing Shen's father is. Today, he ordered people to forcefully lock you up here. The matter on Jing Shen's side is most likely true. If I hadn't heard the news from Xiao Zhe's men, I wouldn't have been able to rush over to bring you away. Since you were able to find me, does that mean you know where Jing Shen is?" Jin Wan furrowed her brows. Elder Mo shook his head. "Before I rushed over, I had already sent people out to investigate. However, Haicheng is so big. There are tens of thousands of 4-star hotels and above. Right now, the only thing grandfather can do is to rescue you. Right now, I can't find Jing Shen, but you are Jing Shen's flesh and blood. I can't allow you to be harmed. Stop the car." Jin Wan suddenly said, "Grandfather, let me get off." Elder Mo was silent for a moment. It was not that he did not know her personality. After all, this was Jin Wan and Mo Jingshen's marriage. She had things she wanted to say and do. He should not stop her. The car had just stopped when Jin Wan abruptly pushed open the door and got off. She turned and ran back to the villa. Before the door closed, she rushed in. Mo Xiaozi heard the movements outside the door and turned back to look at Jin Wan, who had actually returned. His cold gaze was calm as he looked at her. "You've already been brought away by the elder. Why did you come back?" Mo Xiaozi coldly asked. Chapter 126. Mo Xiaozi smiled coldly. "You dare to threaten me? Your guts aren't small. Don't think that Jing Shen can protect you forever. Right now, he's already together with Xu Yan. I advise you to hurry up and prepare for a divorce. Although human nature has a side that is hard to control, even if it's controlled by the drug. Jean Wan's gaze was firm. But, I still believe in him. After speaking, without waiting for the two bodyguards to chase her out, Jean Wan directly turned and walked out. Returning to Grandfather Mo's car, she asked in a calm voice, "Grandfather, can you lend me your phone?" Elder Mo did not say much, directly passing the phone to her. Jean Wan picked it up and was about to call Mo Jingshin when she saw that there was an entire row of call records. There were more than 30 of Mo Jingshin's numbers. They were all numbers that Elder Mo had previously called him. There were so many of them, but not a single one was connected. Jean Wan calmly dialed Mo Jingshin's number and then placed the phone by her ear. After a short beep, there was a cold and emotionless female voice. "I'm sorry, the number you have dialed is temporarily unavailable. Sorry, Mo home." On the way back, it had already begun to rain. Right now, the rain was pouring outside. Jean Wan sat on the bed. The pillow in her arms had already changed shape due to the strength she had used to hug it. The last time she stayed here was on Grandfather Mo's birthday. That night, Mo Jingshin said, "Relax and be Mrs. Mo. You have me for everything." When she returned once again, sitting on this bed, all she could hear was the howling wind and heavy rain outside. She had called Mo Jingshin countless times, but none of them were able to connect. Elder Mo had sent out several batches of people, but they could not find any trace of him. Even the last location of Mo Jingshin's phone signal was checked, but there was no result. Time passed bit by bit. It was already 11 o'clock p.m. According to Mo Xiaozi, Mo Jingshin had been locked up within Shu Yan since 7 o'clock p.m. An entire 4 hours had passed. There was a knock on the door. Jean Wan sat on the bed and did not move. Finally, a helper pushed the door open. After taking a look, she turned and nodded at Elder Mo. Elder Mo's figure appeared by the door and walked in. "Ji brat, since you said you believe in Jing Shin, you should wait for him to come back in peace." Elder Mo looked at her, gently comforting her. "I watched Jing Shin grow up. I know very well what kind of person he is, how his character is, and how his self-control is." Jean Wan nodded silently and did not speak. She knew how it felt to be drugged. After all, she had experienced it before. How she had suffered that night and how her body reacted naturally. Those scenes and feelings were magnified infinitely in her mind and body. It had been 4 hours. If it was her, if she was locked in the same room with a man for 4 hours that night, she would definitely have a mental breakdown. If she really couldn't control herself in the end, she might hit her head on the wall and would rather die. What about Mo Jingshin? What would happen to him now? It was said that the drug would completely destroy a man's rationality, and he would only be able to rely on his biological instincts. Rumble, the deafening thunder sounded again, and a bolt of lightning flashed across the dark night sky. The dazzling light illuminated the front yard of the Mo mansion, but it was instantly drowned in the endless darkness. Chapter 127. At this time, why would there be a car coming? Elder Mo's eyes were suddenly filled with hope. He turned back and urged, "Quickly go take a look. Has Jingshin returned?" The moment the elder spoke, Jean Wan was already one step ahead of everyone else and ran out first. Ji brat, why didn't you bring an umbrella? Quick! Quickly hold an umbrella for her. Don't get wet." Elder Mo chased after her with his walking stick, but he could not catch up to Jean Wan's speed. He watched as Jean Wan ignored the pouring rain and rushed out the door. The helper and butler rushed out with umbrellas. Jean Wan did not notice how cold and wet she was. She only stared at the car lights and ran over. However, when she approached, she realized that the car was not Immerse's but a taxi. Her footsteps paused. She stood in the rain. The night lights on both sides of the Mo family's courtyard swayed slightly under the rain. The car door opened. The moment she saw An Shuyan's figure standing by the car, Jin Wan's brows instantly froze. An Shuyan came over with an umbrella after alighting. She raised her eyes to see Jin Wan, and her footsteps paused. She then turned to see the helper and butler come over to hold the umbrella over Jin Wan's head. However, at this time, Jin Wan's entire body was already drenched. An Shuyan approached Jin Wan. Through the curtain of rain, she softly said, "Mrs. Mo, I'm very sorry." Jin Wan stood there, watching An Shuyan who came alone. From start to finish, she did not see Immerse's figure. Her expression was calm, but it was as though she was silently suppressing her emotions. Her gaze was cold, and her tone was low and slow. "What did you do? Are you going to apologize to me?" An Shuyan lowered her eyes, holding on to the umbrella. "The rain is so heavy. Let's go in and talk." "That's right, madam. Your hands are all wet. Quickly go back and change." The helper held the umbrella for Jin Wan while reaching out to pull her back. Jin Wan silently stared at An Shuyan. She saw a flash of emotion in An Shuyan's eyes and immediately seemed to understand something. She did not speak further and allowed the helpers to drag her back into the villa. The old man had just taken a few steps behind them with an umbrella. Seeing that they were about to enter, he hurriedly asked the servant to open both doors of the villa and let them in quickly. The helper deftly brought 2 thick blankets over to cover Jin Wan. An Shuyan had been holding the umbrella and was not drenched. She placed the umbrella down the moment she entered. "Shuyan. How could it be you? What's going on with you guys today?" Elder Mo saw that An Shuyan was dressed neatly and was not locked in a room like Mo Shaoza had said. "Grandpa Mo, I'm sorry. I should have come earlier, but because there were spies around, I couldn't avoid them. That's why I came so late." An Shuyan said to Elder Mo apologetically, "I can explain tonight's situation to you, but can I speak to Mrs. Mo alone for a few words first?" Elder Mo furrowed his brows, turning to look at Jin Wan whose head and face were drenched in rain. Jin Wan calmly looked at An Shuyan, her voice cold. "What do you want to say?" An Shuyan directly walked toward her, using her gaze to indicate for Jin Wan to go to the side to speak. Jin Wan did not speak, turning to walk to the first floor of the villa near the blue and white porcelain vase. An Shuyan stood by her side. When she spoke, her voice was so soft that only Jin Wan could hear. "To be honest, to me, tonight is indeed a rare opportunity. I've liked CEO Mo for many years. Ever since I was a teenager, my father and Uncle Mo promised me that they would definitely let me marry him. Because the autumn rain was too cold, Jin Wan's face and lips were pale from the cold. However, her gaze was cold and bright. So, for Miss An to come here at this time, it shouldn't be as simple as expressing your stance." And Shuyan smiled mildly, but her smile was somewhat bitter. "The reason I like CEO Mo is because I really like him too much, and I look up to this man too much. That's why I can't use such a method to forcefully keep him." Jin Wan silently raised her brows. Liking was possessive, while love was not easily profane. It was as though it was only at this moment that Jin Wan truly felt An Shuyan's seriousness toward Immerse. An Shuyan's tone was mild and unhurried. "I've always known about today's plan. Although Uncle Mo's methods were a little overboard, I initially tacitly agreed and accepted it. However, at the most crucial moment, I gave up. In order to avoid Uncle Mo's spies, I gave the cup of coffee that they gave me to another female secretary who was traveling with me. The coffee contained something similar to a knockout drug, something that would cause a person to faint for more than 10 hours. After she fainted, I exchanged clothes with her. The people Uncle Mo sent were not particularly familiar with me, so they directly brought the unconscious female secretary away and sent her to the designated room. Jean Wan glanced at her. Since you agreed to this plan from the start, why did you still drug yourself? And Xu Yan chuckled lightly. It should be easy for you to figure out the reason. Jean Wan coldly smiled. Indeed. And Xu Yan was a shrewd woman. If she wanted to use this opportunity to be together with Mo Jingxin, she would definitely leave a way out for herself. If she was also drugged, she could logically become the innocent party. Actually, if it was a fair competition, I might not lose to you. Even if I lose because of CEO Mo's feelings for you, and not because of you, Jean Wan, and Xu Yan softly emphasized. Jean Wan indifferently curved her lips. Missing, from the moment you agreed to cooperate with this plan, you had already lost. And Xu Yan's expression faltered. The trace of distress in her eyes did not escape Jean Wan's eyes. As long as you had the slightest chance of winning, you would never agree to such a lowly and despicable plan. The coldness in Jean Wan's eyes surged. In the end, what woke you up was not because of how much you love Mo Jingxin, but because you understand him too well. You knew that such an outcome would not only fail to obtain him, but it would also bring about unimaginable consequences. And Xu Yan smiled. Mrs. Mo, you really aren't like the rumors. Perhaps I've really underestimated you. I don't need your overestimation. Jean Wan dragged out her words. Right now, it is Miss Anne's sobriety that has truly saved your life. You know very well that Mo Jingxin is not someone who can be easily manipulated or threatened by others. This step of yours is to protect yourself. And Xu Yan suddenly stared at her, speaking in a low voice. Right now, your words are so rude. Aren't you afraid that I'll just walk away right now and continue hiding CEO Mo's whereabouts? Chapter 128. Even though the rain on Jean Wan's head and body made her look extremely wretched, she was still so calm that Xu Yan could not help but want to see through her soul. She wanted to see how this Jean Wan, who usually did not show any sharpness, was different from others. However, her words had already been pointed out by Jean Wan. And Xu Yan indeed had no way of rebutting her words. Tonight, if you haven't found your side and continue to stand by Director Mo's side, I'm not sure what the consequences will be, but I'm sure you won't be able to bear it. Jean Wan's tone was calm. Only by helping me can you save yourself and the Yin family from this disaster. Missin, you've already made up your mind before coming here. Now, you want to use leaving to threaten me. And Xu Yan's complexion was no longer as good as before. However, she forced a smile on her lips. At a time like this, you can still be so clear-headed. I really wonder if you even love CEO Mo. The more uncertain the situation, the more clear-headed I should be, especially when facing you, Missin. If I still lose my composure, then I'm afraid I really am not worthy of the 3 words Mrs. Mo. Jean Wan's expression was calm, her tone mild. Elder Mo could not hear what they were talking about from the other side. Right now, he was so anxious that he directly walked over, wanting to ask what exactly was going on. Hearing the elder's movements, and Xu Yan did not waste any more time. She softly said, I don't know how long that female secretary will be unconscious for, but she has indeed been sent into that room. After all, it has already been over 4 hours. This kind of torture, I don't know how much longer CEO Mo can endure. Jean Wan finally furrowed her brows and looked toward her. He's in the Wanli Xingchen Hotel on Binhai Road, 33rd floor, room 3320. However, the entire 33rd floor is guarded by Uncle Mo's people. It's impossible to directly enter that floor. I can only bring my words to this point. Think of a way yourself. With that, and Shu Yan turned to face the approaching elder Mo. Grandfather Mo, tonight's matter has startled you. I'm really sorry. Uncle Mo has always been a very domineering person. If he wants to do something, no one will easily stop him. You must know his temper very well. Afterward, and Shu Yan pulled elder Mo to the side to continue talking. Jin Wan did not walk over. She only watched the lightning, thunder, and storm outside the window. Earlier, and Shu Yan's words reminded Jin Wan that although elder Mo was powerful in High City, the majority of Shine Group and the Mo family's power was in Mo Xiao's hands. Even if he was not suppressed by elder Mo in name, if Mo Xiao really feared the elder's power, he would not have done such a thing tonight. If Grandfather Mo sent someone to the hotel right now, he might not be able to bring Mo Jingshan out in time. On the other hand, it was very likely that Grandfather Mo would cut off all ties with his biological son Mo Xiaozi. Furthermore, there might even be people who wanted to take advantage of the situation and cause internal strife in the Mo family. 15 minutes later, Jin Wan returned to her room to dry her hair, changed her clothes, and went out. Ignoring the Mo family's obstruction, she drove straight out of the Mo family's gate. Before she left, she only left one sentence for Grandfather Mo. Grandfather, I'm going to bring Jingshan back. Wait for me. Binhai Road, Wanli Xingchen Hotel. This was a newly opened 7-star hotel in High City. It had only been opened for less than a month and had yet to be entered into High City's website. If one wanted to check, it would be easy to overlook the existence of this new hotel. Because it had just opened, the security inside and outside of the hotel were still under construction and could not be considered perfect. Also, because the hotel was too expensive and was located in this area of Binhai Road, there were not many people staying in the hotel. There were also not many staff in the hotel. Jin Wan drove over and tossed the car keys to the security guard outside the door. She took her bag and walked into the main entrance of the hotel. The feeling she gave off did not seem like she had come with a motive. She was dignified, gentle, and calm, appearing like a guest who had no choice but to stay in this hotel for the night due to the heavy rain. Her appearance at this moment did not arouse the suspicion of the staff. After handing over her identification, Jin Wan stood at the front desk and said, "This is a sea view hotel, right? Can you give me a room on a higher floor? This way, the view from the balcony will be better. The price doesn't matter. It's best if it's above the 30th floor." "I'm sorry, miss. Tonight, the 31st to 35th floors have all been booked. Only the 30th floor and below can be checked in. Is room 3016 okay?" "It's on the 30th floor," the lady at the front desk asked politely. Jin Wan smiled mildly and nodded. "Sure. All right. This is the room card for room 3016. Please keep it well." After receiving the room card, Jin Wan quickly walked into the elevator. She did not look at anyone and quickly went upstairs to her room. After entering and closing the door, Jin Wan flung her bag aside and rushed to the window. Ignoring the raging storm outside, she opened the floor-to-ceiling windows on the balcony and walked out. She raised her head to look in the direction of the 33rd floor. Earlier on, she had looked carefully on this floor. Room 3020 was only 2 doors away from her room 3016. Room 3320, where Mo Jingshan was now, was in the room on the right. Jin Wan stared up and gripped the balcony railing tightly. She tested the firmness of the railing and then turned back to take out a pair of sneakers from her bag. She changed out of the high heels on her feet and put on the sneakers, tying the laces tightly. Finally, she threw her bag on the bed and only carried the room card with her. She turned back to the balcony and jumped up with force. She carefully stepped on the railing on the balcony and at the same time, shifted her gaze to the outdoor air conditioner half a meter above her. She tried to step on it. Very good. The outdoor air conditioner was installed very firmly. There was even a very sturdy square railing around it. Jean Wan did not dare to look down. After all, the height of the 30th floor was something she had never dared to challenge in her 2 lives. She hardened her heart and gripped the railing on the outside of the air conditioner to step up. She then carefully stepped on the firewall and metal railing necessary for high-rise buildings. Step by step, the 31st floor, the 32nd floor, the 33rd floor. In room 3320, the shower head was turned off. Mo Jingshan, who had taken dozens of cold showers, put on his shirt and walked out of the bathroom. His dark, boundless eyes coldly glanced at the unconscious woman on the bed. A murderous aura spread around him. Mo Jingshan casually threw the blanket on the bed over the woman, covering her from head to toe. When he turned, he suddenly heard strange movements outside the window. Chapter 129. Then, a rain-drenched head popped out from the other side of the balcony. Mo Jingshan raised his brows and hurriedly walked over. With a schwa sound, he opened the floor-to-ceiling window. Outside the window, the wind and rain intertwined. At that moment, the curtains fluttered dreamily. Jean Wan's figure gradually became clear on the balcony. Finally, the woman gritted her teeth and jumped in from the railing. However, because of the rain, her legs were already cramping. The moment she jumped down, she fell to the ground. She hissed in pain and rubbed her cramping calf while inadvertently raising her eyes to look inside. At first glance, she saw Mo Jingshan in front of the window. Before she could clearly see the man's expression, Jean Wan subconsciously stood up with a whoosh. However, the pain in her legs made her fall forward the moment she stood up and took a step forward. This time, she simply threw herself into the man's arms. For the first time in his life, Mo Jingshan was so shocked that he didn't move for a long time. The weight in his arms brought him back to himself. He subconsciously held the little woman who threw herself into the cold rain and air. Jean Wan's face bumped hard against his chest and she gave a low, muffled moan. You, outside the window, thunder rumbled. Mo Jingshan felt the coldness from Jean Wan's body. Without saying a word, he closed the window and then pushed the woman in his arms away from him. He lowered his eyes and stared at her as though he was looking at a monster. He looked at her from top to bottom and saw a bloody scratch on her face. "How did you come up?" he asked in a low voice, but his hand had already touched her cold face. His cold eyes showed no emotion. Instead, he was so angry that he seemed to want to throw her down from the 33rd floor. Jean Wan didn't explain. She was cold, but Mo Jingshan's body was too hot. She endured the terrible pain in her legs and clutched his shirt tightly. Feeling the heat from his body, she quickly looked around the room. Seeing the bulging quilt on the bed, she didn't hesitate to lift the quilt to see if the woman was wearing clothes. However, when she was about to move, her calf ached so much that she grimaced in pain and almost fell to the ground. If Mo Jingshan hadn't held her up, she would have fallen down. "Ah, it hurts, it hurts." Seeing that she was in so much pain that her expression was about to contort, Mo Jingshan's cold expression softened slightly. He looked at her leg. "Where does it hurt?" "Cramp, my left calf." Jean Wan's face was pale as she pointed at her own calf. "Ah, beat gentler, it hurts." Mo Jingshan touched the area on her calf that was cramping. His gaze darkened, and he picked her up by the waist. He entered the bathroom, adjusted the water temperature, and carried Jean Wan to sit by the bathtub. He poured the warm water on her legs, warmed her legs with one hand, and used the other to rub the cramps on her calf. He rubbed it lightly and heavily. After about 2 minutes, Jean Wan's expression finally eased, and her legs were no longer stiff. She moved slightly in his arms. "Are you done?" he asked. His eyes were still cold, but his hands were still gentle as he massaged her. Jean Wan nodded hard and glanced out of the bathroom. From this angle, she could not see the big bump under the blankets. She then saw Mo Jingshan's slightly messy but elegant shirt and trousers. After hesitating for 2 seconds, she reached out to touch his face. Mo Jingshan stiffened because of her movement. His gaze deepened, and he pressed her hand down. "Don't move." He poured the hot water from the top of her head down, trying to warm her up as soon as possible. Jean Wan could see that he was not feeling well. Her eyes reddened, and she threw herself into his arms without a care. When he was caught off guard and took 2 steps back, she hugged his neck tightly and did not let go. She whispered by his ear, "Was there a woman on the bed earlier?" Mo Jingshan raised his hand and stroked her wet long hair. He said hoarsely, "N." There was no time to explain what had happened. Jean Wan hugged him even tighter. "Did you touch her?" "No," he answered without hesitation. Although the man's voice was hoarse, it was much more sober than Jean Wan had imagined. The heavy stone in Jean Wan's heart was immediately lifted. She seemed to finally be able to relax. She leaned into his arms as though she had lost all her strength. She allowed the man to hold her and sit by the bathtub. She allowed him to pour the warm water on her body and warm her up bit by bit. "I knew it." Jean Wan could no longer hold back her emotions. She sobbed and hugged him. "I knew it. I knew it." Mo Jingshan could hear that the little woman was crying. It seemed like she had finally relaxed but was still afraid. He put down the shower head and hugged her. The strong heat from his body was transmitted to hers. The cold and hot temperatures matched each other perfectly in this rainy night. "The door to this room can't be opened. There are people guarding outside, aren't there?" Jean Wan asked, choking. Mo Jingshan's voice was still hoarse. Jean Wan sniffled and suddenly sat up from his arms. She looked at him with red eyes. "Are you feeling terrible right now? How did you endure it for so many hours?" It was clear that she knew everything. Mo Jingshan did not say more. He rubbed her head comfortingly and said calmly, "I'm fine." "You're still saying you're fine? Right now, your temperature is even higher than a normal person's when they have a fever." Jean Wan put her hand on his chest and touched it. She heard the man groan softly because of her touch and his eyes darkened. She leaned over and kissed the corner of his lips. Although her eyes were a little red, they were bright. She said eagerly, "Then don't hold back now. I'm here. You can do whatever you want now." Mo Jingshan chuckled softly and kissed her lips. He said hoarsely, "Silly girl, this place is not suitable." "Why is it not suitable? Weren't you drugged? You're definitely not allowed to touch women outside. Now that I'm here, what are you enduring? This is the first time I've taken the initiative. You're actually not giving me any face." Jean Wan glared at him and reached out to undo his shirt. Mo Jingshan pressed her hand down. Earlier, he could at least endure it. But now that Jean Wan was suddenly here, and her entire body was wet as she pressed against him, not to mention being drugged, even if it was a normal day, he might not be able to endure her teasing. He pressed her into his embrace, saying hoarsely, "Not here. There are surveillance cameras." Jean Wan's expression stiffened. She stared at him in disbelief and rushed to move away from his embrace. However, Mo Jingshan held her tightly and did not allow her to move. He warned hoarsely, "Be obedient. Don't move. Dash." Chapter 130. "Then, if I'm in your arms right now, won't you feel even more uncomfortable?" Jean Wand carefully maintained a distance from him. Even so, she could still feel the shocking heat from his body. What kind of terrifying self-control did Imo Jingshan have? Even in such a situation, he could still endure it. "With your current state, there's no difference to me whether you're standing there or sitting in my arms." Imo Jingshan held her waist, breathing in the light scent of rainwater on her body. "Why don't you let me hold you for a while?" Jean Wand sat in his arms unmoving. However, as he was tormented, her heart did not feel good either. The man held her just like that, pressing his head against her snow-white neck. His burning kiss landed on her collarbone, causing her body to tremble. Feeling her sensitive reaction, Imo Jingshan tightened even more. He closed his eyes to avoid looking at her, choosing to chat to distract himself. He asked, "How did you know I was here?" "And Shu Yan went to the Mo family," Jean Won answered honestly. Jean Won answered truthfully. She said that although she wanted to be with you, she didn't want to do it in this way, so the person who was sent to your room tonight was not her, but another female secretary who was with her. Jean Won did not need to lie, nor did she need to defame An Shuyan. After all, An Shuyan's motive was something that even she could sense. It was impossible for Mo Jingshan not to know. As expected, after hearing these words, Mo Jingshan opened his eyes. His gaze turned colder, and his grip on Jean Won tightened. He said softly, "So, earlier on, you climbed up from below." Although he was softly asking by her ear, his voice carried a hint of danger. Jean Won made a sound, thinking of how to phrase her words so that he would not be angry. "I was too anxious. I was afraid that you would lose your chastity, so I'm asking if you climbed up from below." Mo Jingshan's tone became colder. He lowered his eyes to stare into her eyes. Jean Won recalled the frightening experience earlier. When she reached the 32nd floor, because the rain was too slippery, she almost fell down. She did not have any protective measures on her. The fact that she was able to climb up with her life was really a blessing from the heavens. "I didn't climb very high. From the 30th floor, I only climbed 3 floors, she softly said without much confidence. "3rd floor. Mo Jingshan's gaze turned cold inch by inch. His tone carried obvious anger and reprimand. "Do you know which floor this is? Firemen need ladders and ropes to climb a building, and you just climbed up like that. Are you tired of living? But the area between the 31st floor and the 35th floor is locked down. I have no other choice. Besides, aren't I fine now?" Jean Won reached out to tug on the sleeve of his shirt. She tugged on it gently and whispered, "I'm lucky. I'll be fine." At this time, Mo Jingshan's eyes were frighteningly deep. He stared at the bruise on her face and suddenly shook her hand off. Jean Won paused and thought he was really angry. She rushed to stand up, but the man went out and turned the dim light in the bathroom into the brightest one. The moment the light came on, she narrowed her eyes, and in an instant, he had returned to the bathroom. Without waiting for her to stand up, Mo Jingshan expressionlessly held her calf that was no longer cramping. He lifted it up, and before Jean Won could cry out in alarm, he had already pulled up her pants. When he saw the red marks on her knees and legs caused by the sharp edges of the air conditioner, his gaze turned even colder. "I'm really fine. These are just scratches on the surface of my skin." Mo Jingshan did not say a word as he pulled up her sleeves again. He saw the bruise on her wrist and the red marks on her elbows that were even more serious than those on her legs. He then turned her hands over and saw her swollen fingers and bruised palms. Jean Won's gaze faltered. She tried to retract her hand but was held tightly by the man. I'm really fine. Jin Wan wanted to speak but saw that Mo Jingshan's gaze was frighteningly heavy. She pursed her lips and suddenly smiled to say, thankfully, the security in this hotel isn't that good. Otherwise, I would have been discovered the moment I climbed out. The distance between each floor isn't too far, and there are fixed air conditioners in the middle of stairs. In fact, it's really very safe. I'm not even afraid, so you don't have to. Before she could finish speaking, Mo Jingshan suddenly held the back of her head and pressed her heavily into his embrace. It was very, very heavy. For a moment, she could not speak. She felt as though she was being pressed into his body. The man did not say a word and only held her. Jin Wan gradually calmed down. She no longer tried to explain or make a sound. She quietly allowed him to hold her, pressed her face against his burning neck, and closed her eyes. It had been a thrilling night. No matter what, at least they did not lose each other. That was enough. Earlier, when she climbed up from the 30th floor, she did not think about anything else. Her only thought was to quickly find him and see him. Even if her body was smashed into pieces, she would not give up the slightest chance to help him. Even though she had already calmed down, she did not regret it. In his embrace, Jin Wan closed her eyes. Her hand climbed up to his well-defined back and hugged his back. However, due to the heat from his body, she opened her eyes and asked softly in his embrace, "Do you want to soak in cold water?" Mo Jingshan hugged her and did not let go. He gently kissed the top of her head. "With you here, it's useless even if you put me in an ice cellar." "Then what should we do? Why don't we turn off the lights? The surveillance cameras shouldn't be able to capture anything." Mo Jingshan did not speak. Could it be that the surveillance cameras have night vision? Jin Wan suddenly raised her head to look at him. He looked at her, silently agreeing. Mo Xiaozi was too ruthless. Although he would not go so far as to specially watch the surveillance footage of his son sleeping with a woman, the reason he installed a camera in the room was most likely to use the surveillance footage as evidence if Mo Jingshan rejected him in the future. Thus, night vision cameras were definitely used. Then what should we do? Jin Wan felt that he was even hotter than before. Mo Jingshan's brows moved. He lowered his eyes to look at her and suddenly smiled. Right now, his shirt was slightly disheveled, and his gaze was unusually dark. There was a sense of decadence and attractiveness to him. "It's all right. The sky is about to brighten. This type of drug will usually wear off after 12 hours. It's only 1 in the morning." Jin Wan lowered her head and suddenly raised her hand. "Why don't I use my hand to help you?" Chapter 131. The man's voice was hoarse and seductive. Jin Wan could barely stand it. Furthermore, right now, he was in such extreme torment. Jin Wan thought he was embarrassed. She had already thrown caution to the wind. What was there to be embarrassed about? She reached out to tug on the belt hidden under his shirt. Mo Jingshan abruptly pressed down on her hand. His gaze was heavy and filled with indescribable darkness and profoundness as he stared at this little woman who did not know life from death. "The surveillance cameras have blind spots. Let's find a corner where the cameras can't capture us." Jin Wan did not wish to see him suffer so silently. She took the initiative to look back at the bathroom and several places around the bathtub. "Here. After the lights are turned off, there's also the door. It definitely won't capture us." As she spoke, she took a step back toward the bathroom door. Her hand was still tightly gripping the corner of his shirt, preventing him from moving away. The moment Jin Wan hid behind the door, Mo Jingshan sighed softly. He did not allow her to undo his belt but instead held her wrist, leaning down to kiss her harshly on the lips. The kiss was deep and heavy, as though he wanted to skin her alive. In the end, he forcefully pressed down Ji-in-wan's disobedient hand that was moving back and forth on his body. He gave a low, muffled snort, speaking through gritted teeth, "Do you want me to die?" Ji-in-wan's hand was restrained by him and could not move. She could only stare at him helplessly and say with incomparable sincerity, "It's just using my hand. I really know how to do it." In the past, Xia Tian and I secretly watched that kind of movie. Seeing Mo Jingshan's raised brows, Ji-in-wan immediately revealed an excited expression. "It's rare for me to have such an active opportunity. Don't you cherish it?" "Of course I have to cherish it." Mo Jingshan chuckled softly but still held her wrist. "Although the wound on your palm is not deep, it was scratched by those metal edges when you climbed up. This kind of injury requires a tetanus shot. Now that you've been soaked in the rain, it's already red and swollen." As he spoke, he comforted her, gently kissing her forehead. "I can't take the risk of letting your wound get infected. It'll be over after one night. It's all right." At this moment, Ji-in-wan deeply regretted that she had prepared everything else but forgot to prepare a pair of anti-abrasion and scratch-resistant rubber gloves when climbing up. She looked at her red and swollen palms for a while, and from time to time, some blood would flow out from the thin wounds. She sat there with furrowed brows. Mo Jingshan thought she was thinking about the wound on her palm, but in the next moment, Ji-in-wan's words almost caused the composure he had maintained for more than 20 years to collapse. "How about I try it with my mouth?" Seeing that the man suddenly fell silent, Ji-in-wan actually felt a little embarrassed. After all, she had seen a lot of big movies in the next 10 years. Although she had never done it before, she was not too unfamiliar with it. "Then, I'll go turn off the bathroom lights." Ji-in-wan stood up and was about to walk around the man in front of her to turn off the lights outside the bathroom. However, the moment she got up, her wrist suddenly tightened. The man pressed her against the wall and buried his burning face in her neck. He hugged her tightly and said in an unbelievably hoarse voice, "If you really want to try, I'll give you the chance anytime after we leave this place." Ji-in-wan's face instantly flushed red. "Who said I wanted to try? I just saw that you were in too much pain," Mo Jingshan chuckled hoarsely, hugging her. "There's no need. Just hold me like this. Stand here and don't move. Are you sure that just a hug is enough?" His voice was still low and hoarse. "But I feel like you're in a lot of pain." He did not speak again, hugging her tightly. Ji-in-wan leaned against the wall, allowing the man's tense body to press against hers. There was no gap between their bodies, and his body temperature gradually warmed her up. Ji-in-wan obediently raised her hands to hug his back, pressing her face against his chest. She closed her eyes and listened to the man's heart that was not as steady and calm as usual. But even so, even though Mo Jingshan's short black hair was slightly messy, he was still incomparably handsome. Even though his shirt and pants were half soaked by her, he still possessed his unique charm of calmness and self-control. In comparison, Ji-in-wan, who had climbed up from the 30th floor with no regard for her life, was completely soaked. There were still some traces of blood on her clothes, and there were small red marks on her face. She looked unbelievably wretched. She did not expect that even at this stage, she was still more wretched than him. They hugged for a long time, so long that Ji-in-wan felt as though she was about to be burned by the heat of his embrace. She had only just begun to relax for the night when she leaned against his chest and almost fell asleep. All of a sudden, the man said in a low and hoarse voice, "Go out first. Let me take a shower." Ji-in-wan opened her eyes. She was about to fall asleep, but she did not immediately wake up. She asked in a daze, "Is it cold water?" Ji-in-wan nodded and cooperatively turned to walk out of the bathroom. In the end, a dry towel was suddenly tossed over her head. It's not convenient to take off your clothes here. Your body is still wet. Wrap the towel around yourself. Jin-won nodded again, hugging the towel as she walked out. The consequence of relaxing was that she really wanted to sleep. She wrapped the towel around her body and subconsciously wanted to lie down on the bed or the sofa for a while. However, as soon as she got close to the bed, she saw the big bulge under the blanket, and the sleepiness in her head instantly disappeared. She composed herself and turned on the dim wall lamp at the head of the bed. She slowly reached out and lifted the quilt. Sure enough, she saw a young woman lying there quietly. Her breathing was steady, and she had been sleeping so peacefully in this situation. As expected, she had been drugged. Although he didn't know how long the woman on the bed was going to sleep for, her clothes were still intact, and there was nothing that shouldn't be exposed. The quilt was probably thrown over by Mo Jingshin, and even her face was not exposed. After all, she was a secretary of the Mo Corporation. If she had not had coffee with Shu Yen, she would not have been sent to the big boss for no reason. After all, she was an innocent person. Jin-won gently covered her with the quilt again. Although her face was covered, she still left a gap at the edge of the quilt to prevent her from suffocating. Outside the window, the rain was still falling, but it was lighter than before, and the thunder was farther away. Jin-won stood by the window, looking at the sea not far away. Even now, she did not dare to look down from this angle. From the height of the 33rd floor, she could not even see the flower beds downstairs clearly. The passing cars were all fingernail-sized shadows. The word love was indeed a superstition of the right time and the right place. It would inexplicably give people fearless courage, and even disregard life and death. Chapter 132. The few hours before daybreak were similarly torturous for Jin-won. The two of them slept on the sofa. Mo Jingshin held Jin-won in his arms. Jin-won slept soundly in his arms, but she could vaguely feel that his body was unusually hot. It was not until 4 or 5 in the morning when the sky gradually brightened. Jin-won slept and opened her eyes to look at the dark room. At the same time, she felt that Mo Jingshin had finally fallen asleep. Although his body temperature was slightly hotter than usual, it was not as severe as last night. He must have endured the most difficult part and finally fell asleep from exhaustion. Jin-won did not move as she leaned against his chest. She listened to his heartbeat and slowly raised her hands to hug his neck, closing her eyes. She did not know if the sleeping man had woken up or if it was out of instinct, but he hugged Jin-won tighter. A gentle kiss landed on the top of her head. It appeared to be an unintentional kiss, but it caused Jin-won to uncontrollably smile in his arms. Jin-won slept for another 2 hours. When she opened her eyes, the sky had already brightened. She raised her head and saw that Mo Jingshin had finally fallen into a deeper sleep. His body temperature had also completely dropped. She released a sigh of relief and moved gently and slowly out of his embrace. She then picked up his coat and covered his body. She tiptoed to the bedside and pulled open the curtains. She looked at the color of the sky. Although there was a thunderstorm last night, the sun was shining brightly this morning. It seemed like it was already past 7 in the morning. At this moment, footsteps approached from outside the door. Jin-won vigilantly turned around. When she clearly heard that it was Elder Mo's voice, she directly walked to the door. "You sure hid Jingshin well, aw. No wonder the people I sent out couldn't find the right place." Elder Mo angrily scolded as he walked by the door. "Brat, you can now be considered a schemer." Mo Xiao's voice rang from outside the door. "In front of father, I'm afraid I can't bear these words." Elder Mo coldly snorted. "What you can't calculate is the human heart. Just this time, you still lost in the end." You sure are confident in Jingshan's self-control. Since you insisted on coming here so early in the morning, I won't keep you in suspense. After this door is opened, you'd better face reality and let Xu Yan marry over. That way, I won't have to worry about this. Mo Xiao's tone was filled with certainty. Ha! Elder Mo chuckled. Then go ahead and try opening the door. Jean Wan leaned against the door and listened to the conversation outside. When she heard the brief sound of a room card being swiped, her brows furrowed and she reached out to open the door from the inside. Mo Xiao's face originally had a hint of a cold smile. That kind of expression really matched Elder Mo's words. It had the flavor of a scheming and far-sighted person. However, the moment Jean Wan's figure abruptly appeared in the room, Mo Xiao's expression instantly stiffened. He quickly turned cold as he stared at her coldly. Why are you here? Jean Wan smiled at him coldly. Good morning, Chairman Mo. Mo Xiaozi glared at her with an ugly expression. He abruptly wanted to enter the door to check on the situation inside, but Jean Wan stood in front of the door and did not move aside. A man in his 50s, who was also Mo Jingshan's father, would not push her away. Elder Mo walked over with his walking stick, secretly giving Jean Wan a thumbs up. His eyes were filled with gratification and praise. He then calmly smiled at Mo Xiaozi, whose expression was extremely ugly. How is it? If I say you've lost, then you've lost. Your old man is still your old man after all. When it comes to the matter of my granddaughter-in-law, you can't waver. How did you find it? After all, Mo Xiaozi was someone who had seen wind and rain. After a moment, his expression darkened, and he coldly questioned Jean Wan. Jean Wan smiled mildly. It doesn't matter how you found me. What's important is that I was with Jingshan last night. Mo Xiaozi narrowed his eyes. Without waiting for him to speak, Elder Mo chimed in from the side. Gee brat, you've already married in for so long. Why are you still calling him Chairman Mo? Grandfather is here to support you. He's Jingshan's father. It's time for you to change the way you address him. Mo Xiao's expression was still very dark. The scene he expected to see did not happen. Instead, he was beaten up by Elder Jean Wan this early in the morning. His face had been completely thrown away, and his gaze was dark and filled with anger. Jean Wan hesitated for a moment, but she still had to give Grandfather Mo some face. She smiled slightly. Dad. Mo Xiaozi coldly watched her. I'm afraid I can't accept Miss Ji calling me Dad. If you want to call me that, then call me that. After all, you won't be able to call me that for long. Jean Wan smiled nonchalantly. She did not lose her composure because of the coldness and threat in his words. She continued to stand in front of the door, refusing to let him in. Putting aside the fact that the unconscious woman inside was innocent and could not be implicated or seen by him, Mo Jingshan had stayed up all night and finally fell asleep at daybreak. He should at least be allowed to sleep a little longer. Elder Mo glared at Mo Xiaozi with a displeased expression. G brat has already given you enough face by calling you that. Can't you keep your stubborn temper in check? Jingshan's marriage is his own choice. Even if you're his father, you have no right to criticize him. This G brat has long belonged to the Mo family. Besides, she's still a 20-year-old child. Can't you speak nicely to her? Do you have to be so unreasonable? Elder Mo continued, as the saying goes, it's better to tear down a temple than to ruin a marriage. You're not young anymore. After staying in America for so long, have you forgotten how to write the word respect? How can you be so overbearing? Jingshan's future belongs to America and shine, Mo Xiaozi coldly said. I don't wish to repeat myself. Xu Yan is the most suitable candidate. How isn't Xu Yan suitable? In terms of family background, Jin Wan is not much worse off than Xu Yan. It's just that the Ji family is in Haiqing. In the future, if Jing Shen returns to America to take over Shine, Jin Wan's position by his side might not necessarily be worse than in Xu Yan's. You haven't even compared them, and you're already denying Jin Wan. You're really a stubborn old man. Being scolded by his 80-year-old father as a stubborn old man, Mo Xiao's expression darkened. He then coldly stared at Jin Wan. Mo Xiao suddenly ordered the bodyguard behind him, pull her away. The bodyguard immediately rushed forward. Elder Mo saw this and fiercely slammed his walking stick against the ground, angrily saying, "Who dares to touch my granddaughter-in-law?" Mo Xiao coldly stared at the elder, coldly ordering, "Are you all deaf? Pull this woman away." Enough. Suddenly, a clear voice rang from behind Jin Wan. Chapter 133. Mo Jingshan stood there expressionlessly. His clear voice carried a biting chill. His gaze was cold and heavy as he indifferently glanced over. The two bodyguards who were about to reach out to pull Jin Wan broke out in cold sweat under Mo Jingshan's intense gaze. They did not dare to touch her again. Regardless of whether it was the room or the entire 33rd floor of the hotel, it was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. This was not the first time Jin Wan had seen Mo Jingshan so cold, but his bone-chilling gaze still caused her to feel a chill down her spine. Mo Jingshan's gaze coldly swept past them. Who dares to touch her? CEO Mo, we were just following Director Mo's orders. He was worried about your condition in the room, so he asked us to. The two bodyguards explained with trembling expressions. Mo Jingshan's gaze was sharp and cold. His gaze landed on one of them, and his lips curved into a mocking smile. Following orders. Jin Wan stood by the door, silently standing there. From the start, she knew that Mo Xiao was completely unable to control Mo Jingshan. Otherwise, he would not have used such forceful methods. Su Maxiao's actions last night pushed Mo Jingshan further and further away. She could feel it from Mo Jingshan's current attitude. In his eyes, there was no longer this so-called father. Cold and chilling. Mo Jingshan approached Jin Wan's side. He lowered his gaze to look at her small face that did not have the slightest hint of fear, and held her hand. Seeing Mo Jingshan's actions as he approached the door, Mo Xiao's expression instantly turned cold. His eyes were filled with displeasure. Jin Wan thought that Mo Jingshan was using this method to appease her. She gently moved the hand he was holding, her fingers scraping against his palm in an attempt to ease the overly tense atmosphere. However, in the next moment, she was suddenly pulled over by a force. Her entire body fell into Mo Jingshan's embrace, and she lost her footing. Mo Jingshan's strong arms held her like this, as though announcing his ownership of her. He calmly pressed her against his chest. Mo Jingshan's cold and firm voice brushed past her head. Jin Wan is my wife. With me around, no one can shake her identity as Mrs. Mo. Mo Xiao's gaze was cold. Where is Xu Yan? She wasn't with you last night. At this moment, a gentle voice came from the elevator not far away. Uncle Mo, I'm very sorry. Mo Xiao suddenly turned around and looked at Xu Yan. The answer was self-evident. Mo Xiao's gaze was dark and ruthless. His sharp eyes narrowed. It seems like Xu Yan doesn't wish to use such a method to force others against their will. I can understand her hesitation. She's such a good woman who always thinks for you. Even at this stage, she would still give up on this opportunity. It can be seen how deep her feelings for you are. Jing Shen, you better watch carefully. I saw it very clearly. Mo Jingshan's tone carried a hint of mockery. I won't divorce her. and I won't marry Xu Yan. I'll only marry one Jin Wan in my life. That's enough. And Xu Yan stood in the distance and did not approach. Although Mo Jingshan's voice was cold and light, and the pitch was not high, it was enough for her to hear it clearly from this distance. She lowered her eyes and did not speak again. A trace of bitterness flashed past the corner of her eyes. Last night, during the lightning and thunder, when Jin Wan drove out of the Mo family home alone, she should have known, from Jin Wan's unwavering trust in Mo Jingshan's gaze, she should have known, Mo Xiao's expression was heavy, cold, and sullen. He then turned to look at Xu Yan's dispirited and quiet appearance and narrowed his eyes sharply and coldly. And Xu Yan politely nodded at him and turned to leave. She did not wish to stand here and listen any further. Mo Xiaozi abruptly turned to look at Jin Wan, his eyes cold. Jing Shen, so what if you care about this Jin Wan? Women are just accessories to your career. If not for the Mo family's power, how could Jin Wan, who was said to have her eyes on the top of her head, be willing to get married at the age of 20? Before the two of you got married, I'm afraid she didn't even know what kind of person you were. As for now, I'm afraid she still doesn't know. Bullsh *T. Elder Mo suddenly scolded from the side. Women are accessories to your career. If you have the ability, say the same thing to Jingshan's mother when you return to America. Mo Xiaozi furrowed his brows, coldly glancing at the elder. It was clear that he was unhappy that he was everywhere. What are you glaring at? Decades ago, if it weren't for your old man's sharp eyes that allowed you to carry the beauty home, would you have been able to marry Jingshan's mother? Back then, she was also a young lady with her eyes on the top of her head. From the start, she did not even have any interest in a bad-tempered brat like you. In the end, didn't the two of you live happily ever after? You even gave birth to such a good grandson like Jing Shen. Mo Xiao's chest was trembling with anger. Right now, he could not be bothered to argue with the elder. He only coldly glanced at Jin Wan. Why aren't you answering? Do you understand Jingshan's past? Do you know what kind of person he is? Mo Jingshan's expression was very indifferent as he pulled Jin Wan behind him. Jin Wan suddenly chuckled lightly and walked out from behind him. She raised her eyes to look at Mo Xiaozi. Does Jingshan's mother know how old you were when you were weaned? Does she know how old you were when you stopped wetting the bed? Does she know how many teeth you lost when you were 7? Does she know how you held hands and kissed a certain young lady the first time you fell in love with her? Does she know what kind of person you were before you got married? Mo Xiao's expression was dark and cold. He immediately glared at her angrily. She definitely doesn't know. Jin Wan maintained a smile on her face, but her lips were cold. Her eyes were clear and bright. She did not avoid his gaze in the slightest as she met his cold and ruthless gaze. Since she doesn't even understand your past, I think you can get a divorce at your age. Right now, it's very popular for old to marry the outstanding in Xu Yan. Isn't that what you want? You're impudent. Mo Xiaozi abruptly scolded harshly. You're still young, but your temper is so fierce. Is this how your Ji family teaches you to be disrespectful to your elders? As your daughter-in-law, I can't even call you Dad. This is already a great disrespect to you. Are you lacking a few more words of disrespect? Jin Wan retorted. That's right. Elder Mo almost wanted to stand by Jin Wan's side and give her a round of applause. Mo Xiaozi angrily closed his eyes. He pointed at Jin Wan and then looked at the smiling elder. This is the granddaughter-in-law you chose? Elder Mo nodded repeatedly, his face full of smiles. That's right, the granddaughter-in-law I chose. Mo Xiaozi, dash. Chapter 134. Very good. Mo Xiaozi was enraged. I want to see just what abilities this Jin Wan has to make everyone in the Mo family favor her so much. She doesn't need any abilities. As long as she's Jin Wan, that's enough, Mo Jingshan calmly replied. Elder Mo chimed in. Just as well, this old man also wants to see what abilities An Shu Yan has, to be able to force you to use such methods against your own son. Elder Mo glared at Mo Xiaozi, whose expression had darkened. Everyone has their own preferences. You like An Shu Yan's radish, yet you insist on forcing her into Jingshan's vegetable pit. Everyone is an individual with their own preferences. As long as Jingshan likes it, as long as the two of them live peacefully, you shouldn't let anyone interfere between them. To think that you're Jingshan's father. Mo Xiaozi coldly smiled. For someone like Jin Wan who doesn't respect her elders, don't expect me to accept her in this lifetime. If you can treat her like a daughter-in-law, Jin Wan will naturally show respect to her elders. Mo Jingshan's voice did not have any warmth. This is the most basic form of balance and respect between people. Elder Mo nodded. That's right. Humans are mutual. To nitpick unilaterally, this isn't the attitude of an elder. It's unreasonable. Mo Xiaozi's expression darkened. He fiercely glared at the two bodyguards standing by the door who did not dare to move. He wanted to scold them for being useless. They did not even know when Jin Wan entered the room last night. However, he was so angry that he did not want to speak anymore. With a dark expression, he turned and left. Mo Xiaozi directly flung his sleeves and left. No one stopped him. The floor returned to silence. Elder Mo looked toward Mo Jingshan, his tone kind. Jingshan, were you all right last night? I was fine. I've made you worry. Mo Jingshan smiled mildly. The elder nodded. Your father's temper has always been like this since he was young. Since last night's matter did not succeed, I'm afraid that old face of his won't be able to hold on for more than a few days. As long as there are no misunderstandings between you and this G brat, it'll be fine. Grandpa, don't worry. I'm sober. Jin Wan winked at the old man. Yo, now you're happy. Yesterday, you locked yourself in Jingshan's room, hugging a pillow and curling up on the bed, and now you're gone. The elder laughed at her. Jin Wan's face heated up. Grandfather, you're actually teasing me. Elder Mo laughed heartily. I won't laugh. Ha ha ha. The elder smiled and looked at Mo Jingshan with a red face. Jingshan, you'd better keep a close eye on this wife of yours. You're not allowed to lose her. If you dare to let her down, this old man will break your legs. Jin Wan saw the old man raise his cane and instinctively moved closer to Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan chuckled, pulling the little woman who had subconsciously blocked his way behind him. His clear voice was like a flowing stream. I know. Elder Mo finally harumphed in satisfaction. His gaze shifted to Jin Wan. How on earth did you sneak in last night? Jin Wan winked at the elder and smiled. It's a secret. Little thing, you're still keeping your grandfather in suspense. All right, you probably didn't sleep well last night. Hurry back and rest. As for Jingshan's father, I have to think of a way to calm him down. As Elder Mo spoke, he walked out step by step with the support of his cane. As he walked, he muttered, Xiaozi has been in America for so many years. Standing on top of power, he's used to ordering his subordinates around. Everything has to be done according to his arrangements. His desire to control is too strong. I think he's tired of sitting in this position. Jin Wan returned to the room on the 30th floor and took out the bag she had left here last night. She then called someone to secretly send the innocent female secretary back. She put down her phone and raised her eyes to see Mo Jingshan standing by the window of her room. The floor-to-ceiling windows were not open. He stood there, his gaze peering out at the balcony. Jin-won walked over and gently reached out to hug his waist from behind. She pressed her face against his back and breathed in the scent of his body that was like morning dew. She felt that his body temperature had returned to normal and rubbed her face against his back with a smile. I don't want to come to this hotel ever again. You didn't sleep well last night. Let's change places. You need to rest, she said against his back. The hands that had reached out to his chest were held by him. Mo Jingshan's gaze was still fixed on the balcony outside. From the 30th floor, he overlooked the boundless sea. Outside the window, the autumn wind blew past, causing the trees below to sway. He did not speak, only pressing her hands against his body and holding them gently. It was very gentle and warm. The room was quiet for a long time. Jin-won decided to act spoiled as she circled around to his front. She pressed against his chest and raised her head. I know it was my fault for taking such a risk last night. I promise next time, I'll definitely. There won't be a next time, Mo Jingshan finally spoke. However, he lowered his eyes, and the seriousness in his gaze entered her eyes. All right, there won't be a next time. Jin-won raised her hand and made an expression as though she was swearing to the heavens. I'll never climb such a high building again. I promise. Mo Jingshan continued to look at her coldly. Jin-won tugged on his collar to lower his head. She kissed his chin twice and continued acting spoiled as she said, I promise. Don't be angry. If I had waited at home last night, I'm afraid I would have stayed up until my hair turned white. It's all so good like this. Mo Jingshan's hand pinched her face. He touched the faint red mark on her face from last night. His warm fingers gently caressed it. His brows were deep and calm as he stared at her, as though he was looking into the depths of her soul. Jin-won's mind was shaken by his gaze. However, she remembered that this hotel was not suitable for them to stay for long and was about to move away from his embrace. However, the man's arms suddenly tightened around her. He stared into her eyes and kissed her. You, don't, dirty. Jin-won rushed to move her face away. I haven't showered properly since yesterday. When I woke up, I didn't wash my face or brush my teeth. I'm definitely dirty. Don't kiss me, however, before she could finish her words, her face was abruptly turned back by him. The man's hand supported her face, preventing her from moving away. When he kissed her again, he pushed her teeth apart and kissed her deeply. There was no room for her to dodge at all. She opened her eyes to look at him. In the next instant, the man pressed her against the wall by the window. Because Jin-won did not brush her teeth in the morning, she did not even dare to open her mouth. Her entire body was stiff and unwilling to cooperate. However, his hands were like vines that wrapped tighter and tighter around her. It was as though he wanted to press her into his body and become one with her. Chapter 135. When they finally left the hotel and sat in the car, Jin-won felt both her body and mind relaxed. You didn't rest well last night and were drenched in the rain. Go back and have a good sleep. Mo Jingshan's hand caressed Jin-won's head. Are we heading back to the U Garden? Hearing the words U Garden, Jin-won's expression clearly changed. Without needing her to say anything, Mo Jingshan could see the flash of hesitation in her eyes. Don't worry. In order to restrict my freedom, he used the method of kidnapping you to threaten me. The helpers in the U Garden were all sent away by him. No one was harmed. The man's voice was mild and quiet, but it caused Jin-won's heavy heart to finally fall to the ground. Thankfully, nothing happened to Auntie Chen and the rest. The security in the U Garden is so perfect. If Auntie Chen hadn't opened the door, those people wouldn't have had the chance to sneak in, right? Jean Wan asked. Mo Jingshan glanced at her, holding her small hand. Forget it. Come back to the company with me. Otherwise, you won't be able to sleep well after you return. That won't happen. I'm just wondering how those people managed to sneak into the U Garden. Jean Wan was deep in thought. Could it be that back then, Director Mo personally went to the U Garden? If he hadn't gone personally, Auntie Chen wouldn't have opened the door. Mo Jingshan's tone was calm. This matter can't be blamed on her. I won't do anything to her. Relax. Her thoughts were seen through again. This man was really scary. Jean Wan grinned. It's not her fault in the first place. It's fine as long as you don't shift the blame to Auntie Chen. If you want to protect Auntie Chen, just say it. Mo Jingshan glanced at her, his low voice escaping from his throat. Today, come back to the company with me. When I have a meeting, the break room in the office is yours. Jean Wan was quite excited to be able to sleep in his break room openly. However, she pretended to be innocent as she asked, "Will I disturb you there?" Speaking of which, Mo Jingshan understood her better than she had imagined. He knew that she did not want to return to the U Garden right now. If she returned to Aolon International alone, she would not be able to sleep well. Mo Jingshan's handsome brows rose slightly. How can I disturb you when I'm sleeping? Are you going to take off your clothes and run into my arms when you're sleepwalking? Jean Wan pursed her lips. This was probably what Great Boss Missouri wanted to see her sleepwalking, right? If you don't mind the eyes of the other people in the conference room, I certainly don't mind giving it a try. Jean Wan had always been good at talking. She would never lose out in a verbal argument. The man's hand around her waist tightened, and his voice was close to her ear. After last night, Mrs. Mo's knowledge in this area has really made me look at you in a new light. There's no hurry to get into my arms in the conference room. As for the other requests you mentioned last night, I can satisfy them tonight. Mo Jingshan's seductive and gentle voice pressed against her ears. His fingers seemed to touch her lips. The needs she mentioned last night, it went without saying. Jean Wan's thick skin instantly reached the boiling point. She raised her hand and slapped his hand away. I don't need it. Previously, I only wanted to help you out of desperation. Now it's too late. Jean Wan opened her mouth and bit down hard when his fingertip entered her lips. The man chuckled softly. Thinking of being shy now, isn't it too late? Jean Wan angrily bit down on his finger again. She then felt that this action was too lustful and immediately pushed his hand away. She turned to look out the window and composed herself. However, she realized that Mo Jingshan's laughter was really pleasant to listen to. His voice was by her ear. It was as though warmth was slowly enveloping her from behind. It was slightly husky, magnetic, and mild. It was as though gravity was pulling her closer with every passing second. Mo Corporation. Mo Jingshan did not rest for a moment. By the time he arrived at the company, it was already past 10 in the morning. He immediately headed for a meeting. Jean Wan's heart ached for his torment last night. However, she knew that he had always been a strict and serious person when it came to work. She did not disturb him. Knowing that he knew his limits, she returned to his office. Today, in the conference room, all the executives found that CEO Mo's mental state was slightly more tired than usual. Although it was not obvious, they could still see it. However, even so, CEO Mo appeared to be in a good mood. There was less of his usual coldness and sternness. Even when he was listening to the reports from the various departments, there was a hint of gentleness on his lips. All the executives were shocked. After all, in this report, there were problems with two departments. CEO Mo's attitude right now, they did not know if it was the calm before the storm or if something had happened. It was rare for CEO Mo to be so amiable in the company. When the meeting ended, the executives filed out of the conference room. Someone whispered, "CEO Mo seems to be in a good mood today. It's rare for a meeting to end so quickly. He's letting us go after just an hour. It should be because there's someone waiting for him in CEO Mo's office. Who? Which deity could make CEO Mo so easy to talk to?" For the first time ever, he ended the weekly meeting half an hour early. It seems to be CEO Mo's wife. Shenmue was just about to head to the conference room to tidy up the documents. Seeing that CEO Mo had already come out, he rushed over. "CEO Mo, Secretarian has just sent an electronic resignation letter over. Should the resignation be submitted to the HR department, or should I directly approve it?" Shenmue asked softly. Mo Jingshan replied coldly, "Just approve it." "All right, I understand. Has Jinwan eaten yet?" Mo Jingshan glanced at the time, asking in a heavy voice. Shenmue nodded. "Earlier at 11 o'clock p.m., I originally wanted to send someone to a nearby hotel to bring her a nutritious lunch. However, she said that she would be fine eating the company's staff meal. I followed her request and brought her lunch from the staff cafeteria. Right now, she should be almost done eating." "Staff meal?" Mo Jingshan's brows moved. He did not say more and directly entered the elevator. When they reached the office, Mo Jingshan pushed open the door. Inside the office, Jinwan sat quietly on the sofa. In her hands was a disposable lunchbox. Inside was simple white rice and several vegetables and meat dishes. Although the Mo Corporation staff meal was also nutritious, it was still too simple. It was even more common than ordinary home-cooked dishes. Looking at the lunchbox in her hands and then at Jinwan's satisfied expression, Mo Jingshan's usually calm eyes revealed a trace of gentleness. "How do you feel eating the staff meal?" Jinwan was originally enjoying her meal and did not notice the movements in front of the door. The moment she heard the voice, she subconsciously stood up. The lunchbox in her hands almost fell to the ground. Chapter 136. Hearing Jinwan's evaluation, Mo Jingshan approached and stood before her. His gaze landed on the lunchbox by her side. Jinwan pointed with her chopsticks. "Earlier, I asked Shenmue to bring another portion up. I plan to eat it after you return from your meeting. I didn't expect your meeting to be so short today. It's perfect to eat it while it's hot. But be careful, it's still a little hot." Mo Jingshan watched Jinwan, who sat on the sofa and ate the simple employee meal with a satisfied expression. "Is it really that good?" he asked with a low chuckle. Jinwan nodded seriously. No wonder so many people want to work for Mo Corporation. Even the quality of the employee meal is so good. It's clear that the other companies can't even hope to compare to our treatment in other aspects." She raised her eyes to look at him as she ate. The man was dressed in a black suit. The traces of dispiritedness from last night had faded away. He stood in the bright office and was especially eye-catching and good-looking. Mo Jingshan picked up the lunchbox and sat by her side. He glanced at her eating manner and smiled faintly. He did not say anything and sat there to accompany her to eat. The office door was tightly shut. Otherwise, anyone who saw this scene would be shocked to the point their jaws dropped. Mo Corporation CEO boss did not discuss the hundreds of millions of US dollars in the afternoon. Instead, he sat lazily and calmly on the sofa in the office, accompanying Mrs. Mo to eat the employee meal. From time to time, he would bring her favorite stir-fried meat. As he did so, he said, "If you like it, ask Shenmue to bring you another portion." "There's no need. This is enough. If I continue eating like this, I'll really get fat. Even if I get fat, I want you. What are you afraid of?" "No, I'm already full. My stomach is about to burst. You don't want the shredded potatoes?" Then I'll eat a few more bites." "Do you want the fried tofu?" After the meal, someone from the secretary's office called to say that a representative from a partner company wanted to meet CEO Mo. To avoid disturbing his work, Jinwan pushed open the door to the break room and entered. She had just taken a step in when she heard Mo Jingshan say from outside, "You were drenched in the rain last night. Take a hot shower and have a good sleep. I'll call you after I'm done." Jinwan raised her hand and made an "okay" gesture before entering the break room. She had been to the break room in his office before. It was when she came over to coax him back to the U Garden. After such a long time, Jinwan finally had the time to check on his break room. It was in the same minimalistic style as Aolon International, with cool colors. Back then, Grandfather Mo had been involved in the renovation of the U Garden. However, Aolon International and this break room clearly belonged to Mo Jingshan's style. Simple, low-key, and plain. But because it was the place where Mo Jingshan used to live, the cold color made Jinwan feel inexplicably intimate and warm. Because she had been drenched last night, she only took a shower in the hotel bathroom and didn't take a good shower. Now her body and head were a little itchy, and she couldn't just lie on the bed to sleep. She opened the wardrobe to take one of Mo Jingshan's shirts as a change of clothes and then take a shower. However, the moment the wardrobe door was opened, she was shocked to see that half of the space in Mo Jingshan's wardrobe was actually filled with women's clothes. They were all new. Thin, thick, long, short, inside, outside, women's clothes. Jinwan took one out in shock and found that it was in her size. She then flipped through the others and found that they were all in her size. She found a thin shirt suitable for sleeping and held it in her arms. She knew that Mo Jingshan was busy in the office and couldn't go out to ask him, so she picked up her phone and sent him a message. "When did you prepare so many clothes for me in the wardrobe? I just opened the wardrobe. You gave me a fright." After sending the message, she waited for about a minute. Seeing that he didn't reply, she guessed that he was busy and went straight into the bathroom. After showering and drying her hair, she came out wearing the clothes Mo Jingshan had prepared for her. She carried the fragrant scent of shower gel and threw herself onto the large bed in the break room. She picked up her phone and saw the reply Mo Jingshan had sent her several minutes ago. "The day after that time you wore my shirt." Jinwan stared at the phone screen in surprise. She was sure he was talking about the day after. The day after. He moved so quickly. At that time, he clearly didn't plan on moving back to the master bedroom. Even though their relationship had improved, they weren't too intimate. Yet, at that time, he had already made preparations that she would one day stay in his break room. Exactly how black-bellied was this man? Jinwan really wanted to reply, but considering that he was currently working and that he clearly had work to do in the afternoon, she held it in and placed her phone down. She flipped over and lay on the bed, her eyes occasionally glancing at the wardrobe. Her hands were crossed in front of her chest, casually moving her fingers. However, her mind seemed to have flown into the clouds, giving her a surreal feeling. She picked up the phone by the pillow and looked at the 15 words and 2 punctuation marks he had just sent. After staring at it for a long time, she suddenly smiled and placed the phone down. She buried her face in the pillow and laughed. What should she do? Great Boss Mo's ability to tease her was becoming harder and harder to control. A few clothes and a message were enough to make her unable to calm down. Jinwan flipped over again, thinking that she wouldn't be able to sleep anymore. However, last night had been so thrilling, and her mental state was unable to take it. She closed her eyes and began to count sheep, forcing herself to sleep. 1 sheep, 2 sheep, 3 sheep, 4 sheep. 98 mo junctions, 99 mo junctions, 100 mo junctions, 101 mo junctions. Jean-Wan abruptly grabbed the pillow and pressed it against her head. Damn it, she couldn't sleep. The man outside was still focused on his work. Right now, her maiden heart was already stirred to the point where she couldn't sleep. In a certain staff office in the MO Corporation, discussions were rife. I heard that Assistant Shin sent 2 sets of employee meals to the CEO's office today. Guess who those 2 sets of employee meals were for? It can't be Mrs. Mo, right? I heard that Mrs. Mo used to be the young miss of the famous Ji family in Haiqing. Since she was young, she ate all kinds of delicacies and high-end food. No matter how ordinary it was, it would definitely be prepared by a highly skilled helper or chef. She definitely wouldn't eat employee meals. That might not be the case. Our company's employee meals are clean and delicious. Even CEO Mo would occasionally eat them when he's especially busy. Mrs. Mo is also a person. It's not strange for her to eat employee meals with CEO Mo in the office. Impossible, she definitely wouldn't eat it. Do you want to make a bet? All of a sudden, Shenmu stood in front of the office door. He coughed and cleared his throat, speaking sternly. Why are you all standing together and discussing? Are you all done with your work? Aren't you all too free? In an instant, the employees scattered like birds, quickly leaving. Chapter 137. In the evening, it was almost time to knock off. MO Corporation CEO's office. The business partners received a satisfactory contract and chatted politely for over 10 minutes before finally leaving. The office returned to silence. Mo Jingshan's gaze landed in the direction of the break room. After the secretary and assistant came in to report on the day's work, he glanced at the time and closed the documents in his hands. He stood up and walked to the door of the break room. It was very quiet inside. It could be seen that Jean-Wan had indeed fallen asleep. The door to the break room was quietly pushed open. On the soft, large bed, Jean-Wan slept soundly. Her soft, long hair covered the pillow, and her sleeping face was peaceful and peaceful. Her phone was placed by the pillow, within reach. It was as though he could see that she was still debating whether to pick up her phone to reply to his message before she fell asleep. Mo Jingshan smiled and picked up her phone, placing it on the bedside table. Jean-Wan slept too soundly. Mo Jingshan sat down by the bed and watched her sleep. He did not move and only watched her like this. In the stormy night, the little woman seemed to have descended from the sky, climbing up from the balcony and rushing into his arms with a body full of injuries. The scene repeatedly replayed before his eyes. He stared at her for a long time. The red marks on Jean-Wan's face had already faded to the point where they could no longer be seen. Mo Jingshan held one of her hands and turned it over. He looked at the wound on her palm. Although it was very small and not considered serious, because it had not been disinfected, the edges of the wound were slightly red. He stood up and walked out of the break room, calling Shenmu to buy some medicine. Not long after, Mo Jingshan received the medicine and returned to the break room. It was so quiet that there was not a single sound. He could only vaguely hear Jean-Wan's light breathing as she slept. It had a gentle frequency, causing one to feel that this room was peaceful and quiet. The medicine that Mo Jingshan had Shenmu buy was not as painful as disinfectant alcohol. However, when Jean-Wan's palm was suddenly lightly sprinkled with the medicine, it still felt slightly itchy and painful due to the anti-inflammatory ingredients. Even though it was not obvious, she still furrowed her brows uneasily in her sleep. Ugh! She instinctively wanted to retract her hand and let out a soft moan in discomfort. Mo Jingshan held her hand and didn't let her draw it back. As Jin Wan struggled harder, he bent down and gently kissed her on the lips. Finally, because the numbness on her lips overwhelmed the slight itch and pain in her palm, her furrowed brows gradually relaxed, and she went back to sleep. Her cherry-colored lips curved into a faint smile as though she had a sweet dream. When the little woman slept, there was a special kind of sweet temptation. If it weren't for the fact that both his hands were occupied and he had to continue applying medicine for her, Mo Jingshan would not mind pressing her under his body and kissing her harshly for a while longer. He slowly got up and gently held her hand. He slowly sprinkled white medicinal powder on the small wounds on her palm. The wounds weren't serious and didn't need to be wrapped with gauze, but the simple disinfection and anti-inflammatory process couldn't be neglected. Jin Wan's clothes were thin and loose. Mo Jingshan could easily pull her sleeves open and apply medicine on the wound on her arm. He then lifted the hem of her clothes. The man who was about to continue applying medicine on her leg paused for a moment. After showering, she had directly put on these clothes. There was nothing under the clothes, and the scenery under the clothes was completely exposed. Mo Jingshan suppressed the fire burning in his eyes. After applying medicine on the wound on her leg, he placed the medicine on the bedside cabinet. Then, he lowered his eyes. He watched the little woman who instinctively curled up her legs due to the slight coldness of the blanket being pulled aside and the hem of her clothes. Last night, the two of them did not rest well. Originally, he should have let her sleep a little longer. However, this scene was too shocking. Mo Jingshan's extraordinary self-control, which he was able to maintain last night under the effects of the medicine, almost completely collapsed at this moment. He bent down and picked up a strand of her hair. The fragrance of the shampoo and shower gel mixed with the faint fragrance of her body. Mo Jingshan curved his lips, planting a kiss on her hair. He then tilted his head, planting a kiss on her fair and beautiful brows. Slowly, he moved down to her small and straight nose, and then slowly covered the soft lips that he had not kissed enough earlier. The warm, soft, and beautiful touch caused the man to feel a momentary sense of submission towards Gu Jingshan. His kiss gradually deepened. No matter how deep Jin Wan's sleep was, she still opened her eyes. However, she was not fully awake. Her slightly dazed eyes saw the man above her. Seeing that it was Mo Jingshan who was kissing her, she did not resist. Taking advantage of the gap between their lips, she murmured with a smile, "Are you done with your work?" Mo Jingshan's movements did not stop. His palm had already touched the softness of her chest through her thin clothes. The kiss on her lips deepened, and his other hand held her waist. The man's kiss moved past her cheeks, lingered on her lips, and slowly moved down to her neck. Because Jin Wan had actually fallen asleep under him, the man suddenly bit down on her collarbone, causing her to shiver. The moment she opened her eyes, she drowsily raised her hand to press her head. "What time is it?" She had just woken up and asked hoarsely. "It's already time to get off work." The man continued kissing her collarbone and neck, but this time, the kiss was more passionate and intense. His voice was as hoarse as hers. Jin Wan was about to get up but was unable to. Only then did she realize what Mo Jingshan was doing to her body. Her sleepiness was completely gone. Before she could speak, the man's hand had already reached under her clothes. His scorching palm caressed her back and moved up, pressing her entire body firmly into his embrace. Under her slightly surprised gaze, he held the back of her neck and kissed her harshly twice on the lips. "You're awake." "I'm awake." Jin Wan was startled. She realized that they were still in the break room beside his office, which meant that they were still in his company. She mumbled against his lips, "What are you doing? What do you think I'm doing?" He chuckled softly. In an instant, he kissed her until she almost forgot what night it was. Finally, the man's actions became more and more excessive. Jean-Wan was provoked into moaning, softly asking, "You didn't sleep much last night. Today, you came straight to the company. Is your body able to take it?" What she meant was that she was worried that he did not sleep well last night. After staying up late and working so hard, she wanted him to take this opportunity to have a good sleep. Chapter 138. What I mean is, before Jean-Wan could finish her words, Mo Jingshan's kiss was already hot and intense. He pried open her lips and invaded her teeth. You, this is the company, the office. Jean-Wan wanted to speak, but her words were choppy. Every word was swallowed by him. Even the places he kissed were more intense than before, causing her to tremble non-stop. Her neck, collarbone, shoulders, chest, and even further down, Jean-Wan was very sensitive, so sensitive that her entire body trembled from his teasing. Those kisses were filled with an even more passionate and infatuated flavor, causing one to be unable to extricate themselves. He tasted every inch of her, not letting go of a single trace of her sweetness. Even if you're off work, there should still be people in your company. Ugh. Don't. Let's go home first, not good. The man's resolute and decisive voice landed on her lips once more. Under Jean-Wan's nervous and embarrassed expression, he said, "Weren't you very powerful last night? Are you going to shrug it off today?" Jean-Wan narrowed her eyes at him. "Mo Jingshan, don't fail to appreciate my kindness. Yesterday, I was," and he suddenly kissed the softest and most sensitive spot behind her ear. She immediately moaned, and then she heard Mo Jingshan nibbling on her ear. His voice was rough and low, which he had been holding back for a long time. "Last night, if it weren't for the surveillance cameras, would have definitely done it until you couldn't say a single word. Jean-Wan, how could I let you go now?" She clearly felt that the man could no longer restrain himself. His lower body was hot and dangerously pressing against her. Jean-Wan whimpered from his kiss and didn't know where to place her hands for a moment. In the next instant, Mo Jingshan pulled up her hand from the bed sheets and pressed it against his body. "Come, I'll satisfy you." His voice was low, and there was a hint of naughtiness in it. She suddenly shivered and couldn't retract her hand no matter how hard she tried. The temperature of her hand was so hot that her whole body felt like it was burning. She blushed and turned her head away to avoid looking at him. This was the first time he had broken through the original boundaries. She could only blame herself for daring to say anything in a moment of desperation last night. Now, she finally suffered the consequences. In just a moment, her hands were sore and tired. However, because of the movements of her hands, Mo Jingshan planted numerous kisses on her shoulders and cheeks. "I can't take it anymore." She was now annoyed by the emptiness. Just as she was about to retract her hand, her wrist was clasped by the man's palm. She kept trying to break free, but she was tightly controlled by him and pressed back again. Mo Jingshan. Jean-Wan's expression was angry, but her voice was hoarse and soft. "N." The man sucked her earlobe and said hoarsely, "Continue." Jean-Wan wanted to cry, but no tears came out. The heat on her face was almost comparable to the heat in her palms. It was similarly scorching hot. The phone that Mo Jingshan had casually tossed onto the bedside suddenly vibrated at this moment. "Go answer the phone first." Jean-Wan's voice was soft, and her eyes were moist and red. Although she did not want to cry, she was almost forced to. He really brought this upon himself. Why did she mention using her hands yesterday? Mo Jingshan glanced at her before glancing at the phone on the bedside table. He saw that the caller was in Shuyan. He reached out to hang up, lowering his head to place a kiss on Jin Wan's face. He chuckled softly, "Your hands are sore." However, Jin Wan turned to look at the phone on the bedside table. "Who's calling? Why aren't you answering?" Before she could finish speaking, his phone began vibrating again. This time, she paid attention and raised her head slightly to see the caller ID on his phone. It was still a string of numbers without a note. She recognized the numbers. It was actually in Shuyan. "She called me twice in a row. Something must have happened, right?" Mo Jingshan was expressionless as he calmly said, "Her electronic resignation letter has already been submitted to the company. Shenmue will handle it. There's no need for me to handle it." Jin Wan took the opportunity to move her hand up slightly, avoiding the man's heated gaze. She took the initiative to pass his phone to him. "Then I'm even more curious. She's going to return to America soon and has already taken the initiative to resign. What else can she talk to you about?" "Curious." Mo Jingshan's brows coldly furrowed. The phone gradually stopped vibrating. 10 seconds later, it rang again. Mo Jingshan saw Jin Wan's insistence and stood up. At the same time, he pulled her up and pressed her into his embrace. He held her waist with one hand to prevent her from escaping and used the other to pick up the phone. He pressed the speaker button. The moment the call connected, Mo Jingshan's tone was extremely calm. "What's the matter?" And Shu Yan was silent for a moment. After a moment, she softly said, "CEO Mo, I've just received my resignation letter." The speed was very fast. "Did you approve it?" The man was indifferent. It was Shenmue. The other side of the phone was silent for a long moment before Shuyan's slightly soft voice came through. "You don't even plan on handling my resignation letter. You're really heartless and cold to people unrelated to you." Jin Wan sat on his lap, watching the man's cold and indifferent face. Only now did she feel that the Mo Jingshan that others said was hard to approach was true. Mo Jingshan remained extremely cold. "When you came, you didn't ask for my permission. When you leave, there's even less of a need to wait for my approval." And Shu Yan instantly tightened her grip on the phone. What he meant was that her coming and going had nothing to do with him. From the start to the end, there was no need for her to leave a single trace at his place. This was indeed Mo Jingshan's style. And Shu Yan calmed herself down and said, "What Uncle Mo means is that after we settle all the details of the cooperation with the Mo Corporation in China, we'll return to America next weekend. I'll go back with him, but before that, my father and I will stay with him at the Mo family for a few days." Mo Jingshan did not speak, only calmly listening. "Also, my father has already planned on canceling my engagement with the Wilson family. That's your problem. There's no need to tell me." Mo Jingshan's attitude was extremely indifferent. And Shu Yan sighed slightly. She clearly knew that he was unwilling to listen. After thinking for a moment, she still said what she wanted to say. "Previously, I heard the Ji family's second miss mention some things. She mentioned Ji and Wan's recent changes. From some of the details, don't you think that Jin Wan is hiding something from you?" Jin Wan listened by the side. She slightly raised her brows, meeting Mo Jingshan's indifferent gaze. She smiled at him, suddenly leaning close to his ear. Using Shuyan's tone, she softly said, "Don't you think that Jin Wan is hiding something from you?" Mo Jingshan chuckled softly and pinched the waist of the naughty woman in his arms. He was still cold and indifferent to the person on the other end of the phone. "This is my private matter. No one has the right to interfere or ask." Mo Jingshan directly hung up, tossing his phone to the side. He abruptly threw Jinwan, who was mischievously causing trouble by his ear, onto the bed. His long legs blocked her thighs, leaning over and pressing down, dash. Chapter 139. Jinwan did not even have the chance to struggle or cry out. The man pressed her down on the bed and kissed her until she was out of breath. This was Immerse's resting room. His scent was everywhere. His open arms were enough to cover the sky. There was no way for her to escape. What did you hide from me? Immerse glanced at her, speaking in a low voice. At the same time, he tugged at the collar of his shirt. His movements were natural and casual, but in Jinwan's eyes, it was extremely seductive. I've actually hidden a lot from you. For example, pretending to love you every day. Only then can I gain your complete trust. Then, one day, when the time is right, I'll poison you, and the MO Corporation in your hands and shine in the future will belong to me. Jinwan blinked at him as she spoke. She acted as though she was telling the truth. Is that all you're capable of? Immerse held her waist, pressing her against his lower body. Jinwan felt some pain from the pressure. She raised her head to look at him, but before she could complain, he pressed her down again. The man's voice was clear and heavy. Based on how infatuated I am with you, you can easily control my thoughts and actions. There's no need to poison me at all. Right now, MO Corporation can be transferred to your name and owned by you. I'm all yours. Whatever you want, isn't it all just a matter of a single word? I'm joking. I'm not joking. He looked at her. Jinwan felt uncomfortable from the heat of his lower body. She tried to twist her body to avoid his dangerous resistance. Continue. He gave a simple order. He pulled her hand down, watching her face that was once again filled with heat. He glanced at her bashful appearance. Continue. She had already received a call, and she still wanted to continue. Jinwan's evil thoughts of revenge rose. The moment her hand reached down, she suddenly used force. After Immerse let out a muffled groan, she paused. In an instant, it was as though she was inspired. She was finally willing to act like a serious beginner, learning from the videos she had seen online. Continue. Immerse's breathing became increasingly hurried. Just as Jinwan seemed to have grasped his sensitive spot and began to exert more force, he held the back of her head with one hand, forcing her to raise her head. He pressed against her harshly and bent down to kiss her heavily on the lips. Jinwan could even hear his slightly uncontrollable panting. His other hand suddenly slid down her back to the back of her waist, caressing and teasing every inch of her skin before pressing into his embrace. I have indeed underestimated you. His voice was already tainted with a strong sense of lust. It was as difficult to restrain the strength and grace of his hand that was firmly pressed behind her head. Without giving Jinwan any time to catch her breath, Jinwan could only hear the crisp sound of the belt on his waist. She couldn't help but let out a low moan as her waist sunk in. Immerse's kiss left her neck. He raised his head and landed on her lips. His kiss was gentle and delicate. Jinwan was afraid that she would make a sound. After all, this place was right next to his office. She turned her head away and bit her lip harshly. He lifted a strand of hair that had fallen over her shoulder and tucked it behind her ear. Remember my words, What are you talking about? I'm yours. The man's low and heavy voice exploded in her mind. Jinwan abruptly opened her eyes and saw that in the depths of his eyes, only her reflection was imprinted. She was going to die. Was he using a big move on her? Jinwan was already about to overflow. Because of his gaze, she suddenly moaned softly and raised her hand to cover her face. Immerse chuckled lightly. He pulled her hand away and brought it to his lips for a kiss. Knock knock. There was a sudden knock on the door of the break room. When Jin-won heard the knock on the door, she immediately shivered and hurriedly tried to stop, but Mo Jingshin held her firmly and didn't let her escape. Mo Jingshin didn't let her escape. There's someone, she softly said in a hoarse voice. Shenmu, who was standing outside the door, had actually braced himself to come. After all, it was already time to get off work. He also knew that Jin-won was here. Right now, both CEO Mo and Jin-won were in the break room. Him knocking on this door was clearly an act of sending himself to death. However, Director Mo had suddenly come to inspect the company. Regardless of whether he was the chairman of Shine Group or CEO Mo's father, there was no way to stop him. CEO Mo, are you asleep? As Shenmu spoke, he felt his scalp turning numb. He felt that his little life was about to end. When Jin-won heard that it was Shenmu, she guessed that he had already guessed the situation inside. Her body was as tense as a drawn bow. She was so tense that she did not dare to move. Mo Jingshin also trembled because of her body's instinctive reaction due to her nervousness. He abruptly lowered his head and bit down on her fair shoulder, barely holding back the moan that almost escaped his lips. What followed next was like a reward and punishment. Not only did the man's actions not stop, they became even more violent and impudent. Yet, it was extremely comfortable. Jin-won glared at him and could not help but moan softly. Outside, could it be that they had already heard it? While she was worried, she was also stimulated to the point that her entire body was trembling. She clearly knew that this was not the right time to continue, yet she was willing to sink into it and be consigned to eternal damnation. Jin-won woke up from a slight jolt. She opened her eyes and discovered that she was in a limousine, separated from the driver's seat in front. Her memory paused at the moment when her mind was about to scatter. It was as though she could still remember the impudent act that surpassed her rationality. She abruptly turned her head, only to meet Mo Jingshin's deep and boundless gaze. Mo Jingshin, you really fainted at the right time. Jin-won completely did not expect that she would actually faint. At that time, she really could not gather her emotions. She could not remember how it ended, how she showered, or how she put on her clothes. She narrowed her eyes at him. In the future, I'll never go to your company again. Shenmu most likely already knew about it. Mo Jingshin chuckled hoarsely, rubbing her puffed-up face. We're husband and wife. What can he do even if he doesn't know? The man was still dressed in a well-fitted suit. This simple suit and shirt style might not look good on other men, but on Mo Jingshin, it gave off a refreshing feeling. It was surprisingly fitting and perfectly matched his cold, indifferent, yet well-mannered character. Back then, Shenmu suddenly came to the office to look for you. Did something happen? Jin-won did not wish to discuss the incident in the break room and directly changed the topic. The people from Shine Group came to the company for a surprise inspection. They only arrived for half an hour before leaving. Mo Jingshin's hand slowly rubbed Jin-won's earlobe, a hint of a smile in his eyes. At that time, I had already carried you into the bathroom and soaked you in a daze. Chapter 140. Jin-won turned to look out and found that they had arrived at the main gate of the U Garden. Mo Jingshin finally let go of her, helped her adjust the collar of her coat, opened the door, and motioned for her to get out of the car. Jin-won's hands and feet were sore from being tossed around by him. As soon as she opened the car door, she almost fell down. Fortunately, Mo Jingshin was behind her and reached out to support her. He quietly pressed her into his arms and glanced down at her. Receiving Jin-won's hateful glare, he immediately understood her situation, and the corners of his lips turned up in a triumphant smile. Previously, she said she would do it, but now she couldn't say a word. He really did it. Jean-Wan rolled her eyes at him, steadied herself, and walked inside. "Madam." Auntie Chen came out to welcome her. The moment she saw Jean-Wan, she immediately stood in front of the door with an apologetic expression. Her eyes were worried and apologetic. Seeing Auntie Chen's expression, Jean-Wan smiled at her and intimately held Auntie Chen's arm to say, "No matter what happened before, it's not your fault. Don't think too much. Look, I'm fine, aren't I?" In fact, Auntie Chen didn't know what had happened, but when she came back today, she checked the surveillance footage of the Yew Garden and saw the scene of Jean-Wan being taken away. Only then did she realize what a big mistake she had made yesterday. She actually opened the door and let in the people who could threaten Jean-Wan, and then she was sent out, causing Jean-Wan to be in danger after returning home alone. She really shouldn't have done that. Later, she called the Mo family, apologized to Elder Mo, and asked about the situation. After confirming that Jean-Wan was fine, she was reassured to wait at home. "I've seen the surveillance footage." At that time, it was clearly Director Mo who said he wanted to enter the Yew Garden to see where you and Mr. Mo live now, but in the surveillance footage, who on earth took you away? Auntie Chen was still full of apology, holding Jean-Wan's hand with lingering fear, and kept asking. "It's all right. No matter who they are, I'm standing in front of you safe and sound." Jean-Wan patted her hand and asked with concern, "You called the Mo family, didn't you? Grandfather didn't blame you, did he?" Auntie Chen shook her head and looked at Jean-Wan with heartache. "Don't worry about us. Go in and sit for a while. You must not have had a good rest these days. You must be frightened, right? I'll make you some tranquilizer soup to calm your nerves." Jean-Wan pursed her lips into a smile and nodded. She turned to see that Imo Jingshan had already entered the door and rushed to follow him in. However, she saw that the man was standing in front of the television, his eyes dark as he watched the surveillance video that the helper had brought out. On the screen, he saw everything that happened after Jean-Wan returned home alone. Jean-Wan could feel the cold and stern emotions in his dark gaze. She stared at the image on the television for a long time. She walked over and placed her hand in his, saying, "At the time, those two people didn't want to hurt me. Later on, I was only sent to one of Director Mo's private villas in High City. Aside from locking me up, they didn't do anything to me. After that, grandfather rushed over and took me away." After saying this, she asked the servant for the remote control and decisively turned off the TV. "It's true. That day, aside from being a little scared and worried about you, I wasn't hurt at all." Jean-Wan's warm and soft voice was close by his side. Her hand was still pressed against his palm. "Delete this surveillance video. Don't look at it anymore. If I made you feel the slightest bit scared, it was because I didn't do well enough." Mo Jingshan held her hand, his voice low and heavy. Jean-Wan dragged him back to the room. After entering the room, she hugged him and rubbed her face against his chest. She said softly, "You didn't do well enough. In this world, there's no man who treats me better than you. You haven't rested. Don't think about it. Sleep early tonight, okay?" The man lowered his head to look at her. His long and powerful fingers ran through her long hair, and his other hand wrapped around her waist, locking her in his embrace. Recalling the scene he had seen in the surveillance camera, he said in a low voice, "I'll sleep later. I'll accompany you for a while first." "I don't need to accompany you." He held her and sat on the edge of the bed. He pressed her head against his shoulder and snuggled up to her. Jean-Wan buried her head in his embrace. Previously, she thought that she would not be able to sleep well for several days after returning to the Yew Garden. However, after a moment, the shadow in her heart completely dissipated. In fact, As long as the Mo family did not come, even an unidentified fly would not be able to enter. There was no place safer than the U-Garden. Mo Jingshin did not speak. She knew that his current mood was affected by the surveillance video earlier and did not break the silence. She reached out to hold his hand and gestured with her own hand in his palm. Time passed bit by bit. Seeing that Mo Jingshin still had no intention of sleeping, Jinwan began to find a topic to talk about while playing with his fingers. "Do you really know a great deal about me before?" she asked. Mo Jingshin glanced at her. "Are you very curious about this?" "No, I don't have any dark cards up my sleeves that I'm afraid others will use against me. It's just that there are some things in the Ji family that I can't bring up to the surface. However, those are all things that I used to target my father and Auntie Shin." Jinwan leaned into his embrace. "Then do you know that when I was a teenager, I studied in America for a few years? Although I wasn't particularly serious in my studies, I still managed to get all A's. If not for my good grades, I would have had to continue studying in America for a few more years. Perhaps I would have missed the opportunity to marry you." Mo Jingshin's gaze suddenly became very deep. He looked at her. "When you were studying in America, I was also in America. The fate that should come will come sooner or later. I won't miss it. Based on what you're saying, do you think we've met before?" Jinwan raised her head to look at him. Mo Jingshin's brows moved slightly. He smiled meaningfully and suddenly lowered his head to kiss her. "Why did you suddenly kiss me?" Jinwan was afraid that the reason he did not sleep was because he wanted to continue squeezing her. She subconsciously wanted to jump out of his embrace. If they were to do it again today, she would definitely lose her life. Previously, she was already half dead. She felt that right now, her little life was in his hands. Mo Jingshin did not answer her earlier question. He only softly said, "Previously, I said that the person I'm bringing you to meet will come over tomorrow. You don't have to wake up too early. If you want to go out, wait for the person to come before going out." After speaking, he finally let go of her and got up to take a shower. Jinwan laid on the bed and looked at the messages on her phone. When he came out, she was just about to bring her laptop to the study when the man who came out of the bathroom pulled her onto the bed. Chapter 141. Hurry and go to sleep. I'll go to the study. Jinwan reached out to retrieve the laptop that had fallen on the carpet by the bed. Mo Jingshin placed her on the bed and pressed his body against hers. He planted a kiss on her swollen lips that had been ravaged in the afternoon. "Tired?" He kissed her. Jinwan nodded seriously. She was really tired. She almost hugged his thigh and begged him to spare her life. This man's stamina was not something she could handle. He lowered his head and kissed her ear. Then, he lay down beside her and stretched out his long arms to hold her in his arms. His low and husky voice was accompanied by his warm breath in her ear. "Sleep with me, N." Jinwan obediently put down the computer and did not insist on going to the study. She turned around and buried herself in his arms, holding him with both hands. She gently said in his arms, "All right." The next day, when Jinwan woke up, it was already past 9 in the morning. After washing up, she changed her clothes and went downstairs. Seeing Auntie Chin busily serving breakfast to the dining table, she felt that she hadn't felt this warm and peaceful in a long time. After breakfast, Jinwan went straight to the studio. As soon as she stepped out of the villa, she looked up and was stunned to see a tall, thin, short-haired woman about 1.7 meters tall standing in the U-Garden by her car. Jinwan subconsciously took a step back and turned to ask Auntie Chin, "Who is this? Can any stranger enter the U-Garden now?" Auntie Chin walked out, took a look, and answered with a smile, "Madam, Mr. Mo let her in." Mr. Mo said to let her follow you from now on. "Ah. Follow me." Jean Wan paused for a moment before returning to herself. She turned to look at the tall, thin, short-haired young woman. "Mrs. Mo, my name is Fong Ling. I've trained at the 11 Training Center in the United States for 8 years. From today onwards, I'll be your personal bodyguard." Seeing Jean Wan's shocked and confused look, the man reached out to open the car door, motioned for Jean Wan to get in, and gestured for her to get in. They seemed to be well trained. Jean Wan secretly wondered. Could it be that the person Mo Jingshan wanted her to meet was this person in front of her? A female bodyguard. "Did Mo Jingshan really ask you to come?" Jean Wan asked. She had only seen male bodyguards. This was her first time seeing a female bodyguard. Fong Ling answered respectfully and seriously, "Yes, Mrs. Mo, Jean Wan." Jean Wan looked at her for a long time, but since she was sent by Mo Jingshan, she had no reason to be suspicious. She opened the door of the driver's side and was about to get in when Fong Ling suddenly said, "Mrs. Mo, you should sit here. I'll drive you." "Are you driving?" "Yes, when you go out in the future, whether you're driving or taking other cars, I have to be by your side. I'll also drive the car to ensure your safety." All right, this bodyguard was too serious and rigid. Jean Wan guessed that she was completely obedient and did not make things difficult for her. She walked around the car and sat on the passenger seat where the door was already open. After getting on the car, she told him where she was going and then picked up her cell phone to call Mo Jingshan. When the call connected, Mo Jingshan directly pointed out the purpose of her call. "What is it?" "About the bodyguards. The person you said you wanted me to meet is the bodyguard you arranged for me. It's this." Fong Ling. Jean Wan turned to look at Fong Ling, who was driving. The other party was completely unaffected by her call and continued to drive without a word. Nanhang is the direct superior of 11 Training Center in America. Fong Ling is the most skilled and has the highest level of training there. "Initially, I plan to have Nanhang introduce you to her," Mo Jingshan calmly explained to her. "Nanhang has an urgent matter to attend to in America this morning. He doesn't plan to waste any more time, so he sent Fong Ling to the U Garden to meet you." Jean Wan did not have much of an impression of Nanhang, but she knew that the two closest brothers to Mo Jingshan were Qin Siding and Nanhang, who was once famous in Haicheng and later became famous in America. She was not very clear about this person's background. She only knew that he was close to Mo Jingshan and seemed to be in the arms business. He was the type who licked blood from the tip of a gun. "From today onwards, Fong Ling will be your personal bodyguard. Her skills are not bad, and she is quiet and reticent. She won't disturb you and will only stay by your side when necessary. At other times, she won't make you feel uncomfortable." Jean Wan made several sounds of assent and hung up the phone. She then turned to look at the responsible bodyguard. After thinking for a moment, she sent a message to Mo Jingshan. "You picked so many people, but in the end, you chose a female bodyguard for me. Her personality is so old-fashioned and serious. I don't even know how to talk to her." Mo Jingshan replied, "You want me to send a male bodyguard to chat with you?" Jean Wan, I can consider this." Mo Jingshan, don't even think about it." Jean Wan, after arriving at the Jean Lin building where Mo Wan's studio was located, Fong Ling parked the car and very consciously disappeared from her sight. As expected, she was well trained. Jean Wan entered the studio. Ever since the studio was invested by Mo Corporation, many things had to be put on the agenda. Jean Wan did not forget that she was still carrying a debt of $200 million. Boss. Xiao Ba had given Jean Wan a call early in the morning. Seeing that Jean Wan had arrived, she rushed over to hand the new financial report to her. Previously, Supervisor Su really did something to the report. Yesterday, I went to the finance department to review it again and redid it based on the company's income and expenditure. It's exactly the same as your budget. There's no difference at all. Jean Wan received it and glanced at it. She then raised her brows and glanced at Xiao Ba. You worked overtime in the studio yesterday and redid it yourself. Xiao Ba nodded. Her expression was somewhat bashful yet wanting to be praised. Right now, many of the people left in the studio aren't very professional. Right now, the finance department is also like a pile of loose sand. I'm not sure if I can do it, so I gave it a try last night. She did not expect this adorable intern assistant to have such a meticulous and serious heart. Jean Wan smiled. Let's start recruiting in the next 2 days. Have the remaining people from the HR department come to my office later. All right. Boss. Xiao Ba's face was filled with excitement as she turned to leave. Jean Wan suddenly reached out to tug on her collar. Why are you so excited? Xiao Ba turned back and pushed her glasses. She grinned and said, because our studio now has an investment of $200 million. All of the construction projects can continue as normal. Furthermore, we have such a huge backing like MO Corporation. Just thinking about it makes me feel that we will rise to become the largest real estate company in Haicheng. At that time, I will be the most senior employee in the company. How can I not be excited? Jean Wan. Chapter 142. Jean Wan sat in her office, staring at the computer screen on her desk. The studio was still in the stage of preparation. From an outsider's perspective, there were only expenses and no income. No one knew what Jean Wan was planning. Some even thought that Imo Jingshan was so rich that he would casually throw her $200 million for her to squander. Even though Jean Wan had received such a large investment, her studio was still not viewed favorably by most people. The domestic real estate market continued to decline. Many companies were eager to sell the land they had previously obtained at high prices. Jean Wan now had sufficient funds on hand. Not only could the several projects under the studio's name continue to be carried out, but she had also expanded her target to several large cities and suburbs around High City. Every place that was valuable to her was marked with a red circle on the electronic map. Which cities would continue to expand in the future, which abandoned residential areas or barren lands that were currently not valued, were also marked with a blue circle. She was purchasing. From an outsider's perspective, she was purchasing crazily. They thought that she did not understand the market and that she would definitely lose everything. All of a sudden, there was a knock on the office door. Xiao Ba rushed in with an extremely anxious expression. Jean Wan only glanced at her before returning her gaze to the computer screen. She unhurriedly scanned through the map of High City and its surroundings, marking out the places that would definitely be included in the city's plans. Boss Nguyen, that's CEO Jin's husband from last time, is here. Xiao Ba had run in too much of a rush. She swallowed her saliva before rushing to say, and he brought a few people with him. It seems like he's here to settle scores with us. Jean Wan's hand paused on the mouse. She turned around. CEO Jin's husband. Settle what scores? Her words had just landed when the office door was heavily pushed open with a pang sound. Xiao Ba jumped in fright. Jean Wan noticed the few people who had suddenly barged in. The ones walking in front were tall and strong. They appeared to be those unreasonable thugs and bodyguards who wielded machetes and went around demanding debts. With those people clearing the way, a man who was about 40 years old walked in. He was well-dressed, but he didn't have a good expression on his face. Although he didn't look ferocious, he obviously didn't look like a god of plague that could be easily sent away. After the man entered, he looked around the office coldly and arrogantly and finally fixed his eyes on Jean Wan behind the desk. "Are you Miss G?" Jean Wan sat behind the office desk. Her gaze was indifferent, and she was unhurried. I remember that the security guards of Jean Lin building are rather diligent. To be able to bring someone in like this, you're not simple. As if he didn't expect a young woman to have such a strong aura, the man coldly raised his eyebrows and smiled again. However, his smile made people feel a chill down their spines. I didn't expect Miss G to be so daring at such a young age. I've heard about Immo Corporation investing in you. I know that Miss G has a backer, but no matter how strong your backer is, you shouldn't meddle in other people's business. The man seemed to be smiling, but his tone was cold and unkind. Jean Wan's beautiful brows rose without a trace. I was wondering why you suddenly came here. So it's because your backyard is on fire and you've been suppressing a stomach full of vexation, so you came here to vent it out. As she spoke, Jean Wan chuckled softly. CEO Jean came here to make a fuss a few days ago. The two of you are truly husband and wife. One brought a lawyer to terminate the contract, while the other brought thugs to block the door. Those who don't know would think that the two of you are opening some charaba. You're not even in charge of a proper investment company. The man coldly narrowed his eyes. You also know that I'm here to block the door. I don't wish for your studio to be smashed into smithereens just after it was built. I'll have to trouble Miss G to make a trip with me right now and explain the video you obtained to my wife. Jean Wan ignored him. She casually pulled up the information of this investment company on her computer. CEO Jean, who came to terminate the contract previously, was the person in charge of Tianxing Investment Company's finance department. The person before her was the general manager of Tianxing Investment Company. His surname was Xiao, and he was also the legal representative and founder of this company. Jean Wan turned back to look at him. Her tone was gentle and calm. Mr. Xiao, I have no interest in your family matters. The private dealings between you and the previous finance department manager of our studio have nothing to do with me. Supervisor Su committed the crime of embezzlement, which was why I handed her over to the police. I personally handed over all the crimes she committed at work to the police. I don't care if you're here today because CEO Jean found out about your shady dealings and started a fight with you, or if you're here to seek justice for Supervisor Su. None of this should be blamed on our studio. I'm the person in charge here. It's my right to hand over employees who have committed crimes to the police. You're a successful man nearing his 40s. You have a family and a child. Do you need me to teach you such simple logic that even a primary school student would understand? CEO Zhao's expression was extremely displeased. You're a little girl who hasn't even grown up yet. Are you trying to lecture me? Of course not. I'm not the type of person who would waste my breath on unrelated people. Jean Wan coldly curved her lips. To me, it's only Supervisor Su who committed a crime. As for the shady dealings between you and her, since I can find out about it, the police can easily follow the clues and find out as well. Since this matter has passed through the police's hands, it's not strange for your wife to find out about it. So, what's the point of you coming here to act tough? It's not like I allowed you to stay in such an unsafe little hotel. It's not like I was the one who installed illegal cameras. You can't control your lower body, and now you're taking your anger out on us. Ji Bian's face seemed to carry a smile, but his eyes were filled with mockery. Don't King talk nonsense with me here. If I were to get a divorce because of this, the company's shares will change. I'll lose at least several 100 million yuan. How can it be resolved with just a few words from you? Just because you have a backer, you dare to be so arrogant. I think you, little girl, are asking for a lesson. CEO Zhao's expression suddenly turned cold as he gave the thugs a look. The thugs abruptly kicked over the coffee table and spare chairs in the office. They moved forward to drag Jean Wan out. Jean Wan's brows furrowed. She did not expect these people to be so unreasonable as to act unreasonably in front of her. She stood up and was about to signal the frightened Xiao Ba to hurry out and call the police. However, one of the thugs suddenly grabbed Xiao Ba's collar and dragged her back. "Ah!" Xiao Ba cried out softly. Jean Wan's expression changed. She rushed out and was about to help Xiao Ba up when the thug suddenly raised his hand to grab Jean Wan's hair. Almost at the same time, there was another loud bang from the office door. A figure decisively rushed in. Jean Wan had yet to react when Feng Ling, who had abruptly entered, pulled her behind her. Chapter 143. Feng Ling stepped on one of the men's crotch and stomped down harshly. The cries on the ground intensified, causing the office glass to tremble. Jean Wan wanted to hold Feng Ling back but was unable to. The short-haired woman's movements were unbelievably nimble. In an instant, CEO Xiao, who was standing by the side in shock, was kicked in the face. He fell to the ground pathetically, and half his face turned green. There were two more thugs behind them. Seeing this, they immediately rushed over while cursing. Jean Wan's fingers gripped Feng Ling's clothes tightly, worried that someone would die. This time, she truly understood how powerful Mo Jingxin was. Right now, she was worried that CEO Zhao's thugs would not be able to leave this place alive. Jean Wan resisted the urge to clap and cheer. Her studio had just started. If a murder case were to occur just like that, it would be a huge taboo in doing business. One of the thugs angrily reached over to grab Jean Wan's hair and drag her out. The moment his hand approached Jean Wan, Feng Ling raised her leg and kicked him. It was as though no matter who the other party was, as long as they dared to touch Jean Wan, she would not be polite. Feng Ling directly injured the two men's legs. She could vaguely hear the sound of their kneecaps breaking. Jean Wan's back trembled. She then saw that the two men's manhood was about to be destroyed under Feng Ling's feet. "Wait! Don't kick them." Jean Wan rushed to grab Feng Ling's arm. "There's a police station near this building. Call the police to come and take them away. There will be people who will teach them a lesson. This country isn't like your overseas training base. Don't kill them." Feng Ling's movements finally paused. Her expression was cold and vicious as she glanced at the trash rolling on the ground. She originally thought that since Jean Wan was in the studio and there were security guards in this building, she would be fine as long as she did not go out. She took some time to buy a bottle of water. However, the moment she returned, she heard screams and the sound of things being kicked over. She rushed in to see that Jean Wan was almost injured by those people. Feng Ling did not speak. She moved her foot away from the man's manhood and retreated behind Jean Wan, maintaining a distance that would not hinder her but ensure her safety. Jean Wan helped Xiao Ba up. "Are you all right?" Xiao Ba shook her head, looked nervously at the person behind Jean Wan, and whispered, "Boss, she's amazing." Jean Wan smiled. Previously, she had doubted how capable this female bodyguard was. As it turned out, his suspicions were unnecessary. He really shouldn't have. Since she was someone Mo Jingxin had specially selected to be by her side, how could she not be powerful? The police arrived very quickly. When they took the thugs away, President Xiao was also dragged up in a sorry state. Jean Wan specially asked the police officer in charge of the previous incident. She confirmed that the video of CEO Xiao and supervisor Su having an affair outside had been discovered by them after their investigation, and that it was not someone from her studio who had nosily handed over the video on her computer. Only then did she feel reassured. As long as these things really had nothing to do with the people in her studio, she was too lazy to ask again. When President Xiao was brought away, he heard Jin Wan's conversation with the police officer. He was slightly vexed, and his expression was difficult to calm down. It was clear that he had already been disturbed at home. A man who originally had good looks and a good family background was beaten black and blue by a female bodyguard in the blink of an eye. Right now, he could not even raise his head. He could only glare at Jin Wan with indignation. In the end, in the next moment, he was held down by the police and brought away. In the evening, Jin Wan went to the construction site under the studio's name and returned after an hour. In the car, Jin Wan sat in the back row, supporting her head with one hand as she read the documents in her other hand. When she heard her phone ring, she picked it up and listened to the report from the HR department. Right now, she had a good understanding of many industries and market trends in the country. She could also guarantee that in the future, the studio would be able to expand. In time, it would definitely become the largest real estate group in the country. However, making money from doing business and managing a business were two different things. Right now, because the studio had received far more investment than expected, the amount of land and real estate she had to purchase would also increase. The studio needed to expand, and the HR department, finance department, and other departments had countless things for her to worry about every day. Jin Wan vainly hoped that in this life, she could stand at the peak of both love and career. However, although she had previously studied in America and had a good degree, she did not have a major in business management or business operation. Even if her brain and foresight were sufficient, she was still somewhat lacking in management. She had only just started, and she was already in a terrible mess. These 2 days, Xia Tian had sent her a message saying that she would come to her studio to help after being discharged from the hospital. However, this was still not enough. Jin Wan supported her head with her hand and placed her phone aside. She turned to look at the darkening sky outside the car window. At night, in the Yew Garden. With Auntie Chen's dinner, Jin Wan most likely would not have the opportunity to see Mo Jingshan personally cook for a while. On the dining table, Mo Jingshan's chopsticks had just reached over, and Jin Wan's chopsticks accidentally bumped into it. He glanced at her and used his chopsticks to pick up another dish. Jin Wan's chopsticks followed. Like this, the chopsticks fight for a long time before Mo Jingshan finally put down his chopsticks. His deep, dark eyes stared unblinkingly at Jin Wan, and there seemed to be a faint smile hidden in his eyes. The man's hand was casually placed on the table, and his posture was leisurely. It was a stark contrast to Jin Wan, who seemed to have something on her mind. Something on your mind. His slender fingers picked up the dishes in front of him, placing them in front of Jin Wan in case she could not reach them. Jin Wan finally returned to herself. She raised her head to meet his interested gaze, and when she lowered her head, she saw that almost all of her favorite dishes had been placed in front of her. She directly put down her chopsticks, saying, "Recently, I plan to buy some books on business management and self-study at home. Do you have any good books to recommend?" Mo Jingshan picked up the glass on the table, lowering his head to slowly drink a mouthful of water. Even though he was drinking ordinary water, he still had the elegance and composure of a high-end red wine. Following which, the man unhurriedly said, "It's just an investment of 200 million yuan, and it's already giving you so much pressure. You still want to buy books to self-study business management?" Why did it feel like he was mocking her? Jin Wan picked up her chopsticks again, picking up a mouthful of vegetables and placing it in her mouth to chew. She unhappily said, Why do I feel like the great CEO Mo is looking down on me? Only you can turn 50 million yuan into 3 billion yuan in 3 years. Can't I be better than you? Chapter 144. Jean Wand pursed her lips. No, I'm only suitable to be your wife. It's fine to be kissed, hugged, and raised up by you. If you were to be my tutor, I'm sure you'd scold me until I develop a fragile heart. The smile on Mo Jingshan's handsome face deepened. He reached out to ladle a bowl of soup for Jean Wan. How could I possibly scold you? That's right, he wouldn't scold her. Wasn't using his actions to make her cry from night to day a more brutal punishment? Eat first. Don't sit there in a daze, Mo Jingshan reminded. Jean Wan picked up the bowl and began eating. She quickly and decisively finished her meal before running upstairs into Mo Jingshan's study to look for books. In the end, after searching for a long time, she could not find the books she wanted to read. Instead, they were mostly famous business cases and books in various languages. The rest were mostly files from the company temporarily placed at home. Unable to find them, Jean Wan gave up on his study. She turned around to leave when she saw the man standing by the study door. The light in the study was not particularly bright. Mixed with the moonlight shining in from the window, it made him appear like a cool breeze and a bright moon. However, he appeared slightly mysterious. What are you looking for? He entered and reached out to hold Jean Wan's back, pulling her in front of him. His fingers gently caressed her hair and slender back. His warm breath landed on Jean Wan's cheek, warm and ambiguous. Jean Wan thought in her heart, as expected, she couldn't let Mo Jingshan be her tutor. Otherwise, whenever she looked for him to study, he would flirtatiously throw her onto the bed for a while. It would really affect the progress of her studies. I thought there would be books on business management in your study. In the end, there isn't a single one. I don't read those things. Of course, there aren't any. Thus, some geniuses were born with it. Managing such a large company and still managing it in an orderly manner, when Mo Jingshan took over America's Shine Group in the future, he would most likely be just as skilled or even more skilled. Mo Jingshan's cell phone rang. Jean Wan did not delay him from picking it up. She turned back to his study and brought out a classic English book with business cases to read. When he returned from the call, the man carried her, who was reading on the bed, onto his lap. Jean Wan shifted her gaze away from the book and raised her eyes. Why are you looking at me? I don't understand the books in other languages in your study. I can only read this book in English. Mo Jingshan glanced at her again and took the book from her hands. He flipped through several pages and stopped halfway through, returning the book to her. There are a few foreign real estate marketing cases at the back of this page, he said lightly. Jean Wan took a few more serious glances and raised her head to look at his handsome and perfect side profile. She asked in surprise, the books on the bookshelves are written in at least 7 or 8 languages from different countries. Don't tell me you've read all of them. And you remember the contents of every single book. He chuckled and calmly hugged her. Having a photographic memory is also an essential instinct for a business manager. No matter when or where, you must have an impression of every detail that concerns the company, big or small, so that you can better judge the situation and make the most perfect analysis and decision. Jean Wan raised the book. You're going to teach me now. If you can maintain your gentlemanly attitude, I can consider letting you be my tutor. Mo Jingshan held back his laughter, caressing her face. I've slept with you countless times inside and out. Now you want me to be a gentleman. Lying to myself is not the attitude a business manager should have. She could not win against him. Jean Wan lowered her head to continue reading. Even when night fell, she was still staring at the book on the bed. Mo Jingshan pulled her under the blankets and lightly said, "Grandfather just called. He asked us to return to the Mo family home for a night the day after tomorrow." "Why are you suddenly going back? Is there something?" Mo Jingshan brought Jin Wan into his embrace. "And Shu Yan and her father will be staying at the Mo family home as guests for the next few days. Their flight back to America has already been booked. Although grandfather does not plan on having too much of a relationship with the Yin family, as the head of the Mo family, he still has to be polite. He asked us to go back for a meal as a farewell. Why do I feel that this isn't a request grandfather would make?" Jin Wan raised her head to look at Mo Jingshan's expression. Mo Jingshan rubbed her head. "You saw through it but didn't say it out loud. You're smart. With me around, no matter if it's the Mo family or the Ji family, no one will dare to eat you." Jin Wan bit down on his chin. "It's already good enough that I didn't eat in Shuyan. Who can eat me, aw?" Mo Jingshan bit back on her lips. "I can eat." Jin Wan raised her head to continue biting him. The two of them bit for a long time. Jin Wan's breathing became more hurried. In the end, she hurriedly called for a stop and did not move around under him. Mo Jingshan's hand held her slightly cold feet under the blankets. His brows furrowed slightly. "Your feet are so cold. It's almost mid-autumn. The weather outside is only a few degrees above zero. Every year, my hands and feet are always cold at this time." Jin Wan allowed her feet to remain in his palms and did not pull them out. "I heard from the elderly that when your hands and feet are cold, it means that no one is hurting you." Mo Jingshan kissed the corner of her lips. "Haven't I doted on you enough?" Jin Wan had only said it casually, but in the blink of an eye, she was instantly killed by his words. She could not retort back and simply moved her feet in his palms. In an instant, they were held by him again. "I won't torment you anymore. Rest early. When you return to the Mo family, go to the back mountain to soak in a hot spring. It'll help with your cold body." His tone was light. Jin Wan's eyes immediately brightened. "The Mo family's back mountain's hot spring. Isn't that a place that doesn't allow outsiders to enter easily? You're Mrs. Mo, not an outsider." Mo Jingshan's words landed, using his gaze to warn her to quickly place the book in her hands aside. He softly said, "Sleep." Perhaps because she was used to being dominated by him in bed, Jin Wan immediately obediently placed the book on the bedside table. The next day, Feng Ling drove. Jin Wan sat in the car and browsed through the news on her phone. She suddenly saw the news of Haiqing Tianxing Investment Company being taken down. Even if the police were to interfere, their actions would not have been so fast. Furthermore, with money, even the devil would turn millstones. If CEO Xiao and CEO Jin both wanted to protect the company, they could bear with each other and turn the big problem into a small one. The police would not be able to continue interfering. Now that this company had suddenly been taken down, it was equivalent to closing down overnight. Jin Wan's fingers paused on the screen. She turned to look at Feng Ling, who was driving. "Yesterday's matter, did you tell Mo Jingshan?" Feng Ling focused on driving while replying, "Yes." No wonder. Mo Jingshan was really too black-bellied. Last night, he did not make a move. In the end, this company actually quietly died in his hands. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.